There are moments in life when happiness arrives so quietly you almost don't trust it. For me, that moment came standing beneath the old oak tree overlooking Carter Ranch. The wind rolled across the Texas grasslands, carrying the scent of fresh hay and cedar. Horses grazed in the distance as if nothing extraordinary was happening. Yet, everything about my life was changing. I was 66 years old. After 32 years in the United States Army, I'd learned to expect conflict before peace, disappointment before celebration. Life had conditioned me that way. But standing beside Evelyn Carter, wearing a simple navy blue dress instead of the expensive gowns people expected from one of the wealthiest women in 3 counties, I dared to believe peace had finally found me. She smiled at me, not the polished smile she'd used at charity dinners, not the confident smile she'd worn while negotiating million-dollar cattle contracts. This one was different. This one belonged only to me. "You still have time to run," she whispered. I laughed. I spent 32 years running toward danger. She squeezed my hand. "I know." The minister cleared his throat. The ceremony wasn't elaborate. No television cameras, no newspaper reporters, no politicians hoping for photographs. Just a handful of friends who genuinely wished us happiness. Judge Helen Brooks stood quietly beside the front row. She'd been Evelyn's closest friend for over 40 years. She looked at us with tears in her eyes. I never thought I'd see Evelyn smile like this again. She had told me before the ceremony. Neither had I. When Evelyn's first husband, Richard Carter, passed away 4 years earlier, she'd buried herself in work. The ranch became her entire life. Thousands of acres, more cattle than I could count. Oil leases, wind energy contracts, investments spread across half the state. People estimated she was worth somewhere around $60 million. I never asked. I never wanted to know. Money had never interested me much. After retiring from the army, I'd bought a modest cabin 20 miles away with my pension and savings. Fishing, reading, helping neighbors fix fences. That was enough. Then one afternoon, my truck broke down outside Carter Ranch. Funny how life works. Evelyn herself had driven past in an old ranch pickup instead of one of her luxury vehicles. "You look like you could use help," she'd said. "I've had worse days." She laughed. "I doubt that. You'd be surprised." That conversation lasted 10 minutes. Our friendship lasted almost 3 years. Love came slowly. At our age, people don't usually fall in love the way teenagers do. There were no dramatic declarations, no whirlwind romance. Just 2 lonely people who found comfort sitting on the same porch watching sunsets. Some evenings we'd hardly speak. She'd drink iced tea. I'd sip black coffee. Silence became another language between us. Eventually she reached for my hand. Eventually I reached back. Simple, honest, real. The minister asked us to exchange rings. Mine cost less than $100. Evelyn insisted on matching mine exactly. "No diamonds," she'd said while we shopped. "No nonsense. I can afford." "I know what you can afford." She interrupted me with a smile. "I want what means something." So we bought identical gold bands. Plain. Strong, just like the marriage we hoped to build. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The applause lasted only a few seconds. Then I kissed Evelyn. When we turned around, Ryan Carter was standing 50 yards away. He hadn't been invited. Neither had his younger brother, Derek. Yet there they stood. Ryan's expensive black SUV sat beside the ranch road. His arms were folded tightly across his chest. Derek looked uncomfortable. Ryan looked furious. Evelyn's smile disappeared. "I told them not to come," she whispered. "I figured." Ryan walked toward us slowly. Every step looked calculated, measured, like a man approaching a business negotiation instead of his mother's wedding. He stopped only a few feet away. "So," he looked at me before turning toward Evelyn, "you actually did it?" Evelyn didn't flinch. "Yes." "You married him?" "Yes." Ryan nodded slowly. "I warned you this would happen." "No," she corrected him calmly. "You warned me what you wanted to happen." His jaw tightened. "You've embarrassed this family." "I married the man I love." "You married a stranger." "I've known Michael for almost 3 years." Ryan looked directly into my eyes. "You've known his act for 3 years." I stayed quiet. Army life teaches you something valuable. The first man who loses control usually loses everything else. Ryan stepped closer. I know exactly what this is. Evelyn answered before I could. No, you don't. Is after the ranch. I don't want your ranch. Ryan laughed loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. That's what every gold digger says. Judge Brooks stepped forward. Ryan. He ignored her. I had private investigators looking into him. That surprised me. Apparently not Evelyn. You invaded his privacy. I protected my family. Ryan reached inside his jacket and pulled out a folder. I have military records. I served proudly. I know. I have financial statements. I've never hidden them. I have every property you've ever owned. I shrugged. My cabin isn't exactly a secret. He smiled. Cold, calculated. You've spent your entire life making average money. Correct. And now. He looked around dramatically. You've married $60 million. Silence settled across the guests. People shifted awkwardly. No one knew what to say. Finally I spoke. Ryan. He looked almost disappointed that I'd remained calm. I loved your mother when she still drove an old pickup with mud on the tires. So, I'd still love her if tomorrow morning she owned nothing. You expect us to believe that. I don't particularly care what you believe. That made him blink. Bullies usually expect anger, not indifference. He held up the folder. This marriage won't last. Evelyn crossed her arms. Excuse me. I'm contesting it. The minister frowned. You can't simply. I absolutely can. Ryan looked directly at his mother. I've already spoken to attorneys. Derek finally spoke. Ryan, not now. Ryan never looked away from Evelyn. I'm filing to challenge your mental competency. Every person standing there froze. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Evelyn stared at her own son. You think I'm mentally incompetent. I think an elderly woman marrying a retired soldier half the county has never heard of raises serious questions. I'm 2 years older than Michael. Exactly. Judge Brooks stepped between them. That's enough. Ryan smiled again. No, it isn't. He looked directly at me. You think today was the beginning? He shook his head slowly. It was the declaration of war. Then he turned around. Derek hesitated. He looked at Evelyn with obvious guilt. I'm sorry, Mom. Then he followed his brother. The SUVs disappeared down the ranch road. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, the minister quietly asked whether we wanted to continue with the reception. Evelyn looked exhausted. I took her hand. We're married. She nodded. Yes. We'll handle tomorrow. I smiled gently. Tomorrow. She leaned against my shoulder. I hoped they'd eventually accept us. I kissed her forehead. They might. She looked up. You really believe that? I looked toward the disappearing dust cloud. No. I believe we'll survive whether they do or not. That afternoon our friends tried to celebrate. There was barbecue. Homemade pie. Music. Lot of that sounded a little forced after Ryan's performance. Still, for a few precious hours, life felt almost normal. None of us knew that before sunset, Ryan had already filed the first lawsuit. And by the end of the week, the town would begin believing I had married the richest widow in Texas, for one reason. Her money. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more heartfelt stories like this one. When Evelyn and I finally drove through the fronts of Carter Ranch as husband and wife, the padlock hanging from the main entrance wasn't ours. Someone had changed every lock on the property, and standing beside the gate, waiting for us, was Ryan holding the only key. The first thing I noticed wasn't Ryan. It was the chain, heavy steel, brand new, wrapped twice around the main gate of Carter Ranch. The padlock still had the manufacturer's sticker hanging from it. Someone had planned this. Ryan leaned against his black SUV like he was waiting for old friends instead of his own mother. He looked almost relaxed. Almost. Evelyn stared through the windshield. What have you done? Ryan pushed himself away from the vehicle. I've protected family property. You changed the locks. I did. You had no authority. I disagree. I shut off the truck. Stay here. Evelyn touched my arm. Michael, I'll handle this. Years in the army taught me something simple. Never approach an angry man with anger of your own. I stepped out and walked toward the gate. Ryan met me halfway. Close enough that only the two of us could hear each other. You should have walked away after the wedding. I just got married. You still have time to get divorced. I don't. You'd save yourself a lot of trouble. I smiled slightly. I've lived through artillery. I don't scare easily. His expression hardened. This isn't a battlefield. No, it's worse, he frowned. Families know exactly where to hurt you. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then, he laughed. You really think you're wise, don't you? No! I've simply lived long enough to recognize pain. He looked over my shoulder at Evelyn. She's not coming back onto this ranch. I turned. Evelyn had already stepped out of the truck. She walked toward us with the same calm confidence she'd carried into boardrooms for decades. I own this property. Ryan folded his arms. You owned it. What does that mean? It means I activated the emergency authority in the family trust. For the first time, I saw genuine confusion cross Evelyn's face. What emergency authority? The clause Dad insisted on 20 years ago. She stared at him. There is no such clause. Ryan reached into his briefcase and handed her several papers. I suggest you read them. She took them. I watched her eyes move across the pages. Then stop. Then start again. This. Her voice almost disappeared. This isn't possible. Ryan looked pleased. It is. You forged this? I didn't. She flipped another page. Judge Helen Brooks, witness signature. Notarized. I've never seen this document. It was never your responsibility. It was my trust. Ryan smiled. Until today. She looked up. This says. She swallowed hard. If two trustees believe I'm mentally compromised, temporary operational authority transfers to my eldest son. Correct. Who are the trustees? You and me. She blinked. I never agreed to this. You signed the amended trust after Dad passed away. I signed tax documents. You signed a lot of paperwork. I watched her hands begin to shake, not from fear, from disbelief. I gently took the papers. Most of it was legal language. Dense, complicated. But one thing stood out immediately. There were initials on nearly every page. Evelyn's initials. Whether she'd knowingly signed them, I couldn't tell. Ryan pointed toward the ranch house. A's acting trustee. I've secured all property. You can't lock your own mother out. I already have. You can't? I just did. Evelyn stepped closer. I want my house key. New. My office. New. My bedroom. New. My husband's belongings. Ryan looked directly at me. He has no belongings here. We were married this morning. You'll be divorced soon enough. I felt Evelyn tense beside me. Before she could answer, I spoke. Ryan, what? If you're right. He smiled. The courts will decide. They will. If you're wrong. I'm not. Then you're making a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. For just a second. Something flickered across his face. Doubt, only for a heartbeat. Then it vanished. He tossed a large envelope through the bars of the gate. It landed in the dirt. You've both been served. He climbed back into his SUV. This isn't personal. He started the engine. It's business. I watched him drive away. Only after the dust settled did I bend down and pick up the envelope. Petition to challenge marital validity. Petition for emergency conservatorship. Motion to freeze joint financial transfers. 3 lawsuits. Filed the same afternoon we were married. Evelyn leaned against the truck. I don't understand. You don't have to? I should have seen this. No. I signed something. You trusted your family. She laughed bitterly. Apparently. We stood in silence. Home was only 50 yards away. But it might as well have been another country. Judge Helen Brooks arrived less than 30 minutes later. She parked beside us and climbed out carrying another folder. The moment she saw the gate, her shoulders dropped. Oh, Ryan. Evelyn handed her the trust papers. Helen read quietly, longer than I expected. Finally she sighed. I remember this amendment. Evelyn looked shocked. You do? I wasn't involved. Then why is your name here? I'm only listed as the successor mediator. She looked at Ryan's signature. He filed everything. Can he do this? Helen chose her words carefully. He can file. Can he win? That's another question. Evelyn crossed her arms. Tell me honestly. Helen looked directly into her eyes. The competency challenge, she paused, is going to become very public. I saw Evelyn close her eyes. In this town? Yes. The newspapers? Probably. The bank? They've likely already received notice. Evelyn whispered something I barely heard. My father built this ranch. Helen nodded. I know. My husband expanded it. I know. And now my own son. She couldn't finish. Helen stepped forward and hugged her. Neither woman spoke for almost a full minute. That evening, we rented 2 rooms at the only motel in town. The Sunset Trails Motel hadn't changed since the 1980s. Orange curtains, old carpet, a vending machine that hummed louder than the air conditioner. The owner recognized Evelyn immediately. Mrs. Carter. She smiled sadly. It's just Evelyn tonight. The woman hesitated. I heard. News travels fast. I'm sorry. So am I. When we reached the room, Evelyn sat quietly on the edge of the bed, still wearing her wedding dress. She hadn't changed since the ceremony. She looked around the tiny motel room. I own 4 guest houses. I smiled. I know. And tonight. She laughed softly through tears. I'm spending my wedding night in room 12. I sat beside her. I've slept in worse places. I'm sure you have. I once spent Christmas inside a tent during a snowstorm. She smiled. Was it romantic? Only if you enjoy frozen socks. She laughed. Really laughed. For the first time since the gate. I love you. The words came unexpectedly, quietly, like she'd simply realized they needed saying. I took her hand. I know. Knew. She shook her head. I don't think you do. She turned toward me. You could leave? I could. You'd avoid months of lawyers. Probably. You'd avoid gossip. Yes. You'd avoid losing friends. Maybe. She looked down. I wouldn't blame you. I lifted her chin gently. Evelyn. What? I didn't marry your ranch. I know. I didn't marry your money. I know. I married the woman who stopped to help a stranger whose truck had broken down. She smiled. The old Ford pickup. Exactly. You looked terrible. I did. I almost kept driving. You would have regretted it. I definitely would have. She leaned against my shoulder. Neither of us noticed. Across the street, a man sitting inside a parked pickup truck raised a camera. Click. Another photograph. Click. Then another. The next morning, those photographs would appear on social media. The captions would all say the same thing. New husband enjoys luxury honeymoon at local motel while widow faces family crisis. The truth didn't matter. The rumor had already begun. And by breakfast, half the town would believe I'd married Evelyn Carter for one reason. Her fortune. Neither of us knew the real attack had only just begun. By sunrise, the rumors had already outrun the truth. That's the thing about small towns. Facts walk. Gossip drives a pickup. I woke before Evelyn. Army habits die hard. 6 o'clock found me standing outside room 12 with a paper cup of motel coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the previous administration. Across the parking lot, the morning was peaceful. Birds perched on power lines. A rancher fueled his truck. 2 teenagers argued over whose turn it was to drive. For a moment, life looked normal. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Frank Wilson. Frank and I had served together nearly 30 years ago. We hadn't spoken in weeks. The text contained only one sentence. You need to see what people are saying. Below it was a link. I opened it. The town's community Facebook page. Someone had uploaded photographs from the motel parking lot. One showed me helping Evelyn out of the truck. Another showed us carrying our overnight bags. A third caught me holding her hand outside our room. None of those bothered me. The caption did. Millionaire widow, kicked out of her own ranch after secret marriage. Below that, the new husband is already enjoying the lifestyle. Hundreds of comments. Some defended Evelyn, most didn't. I always knew somebody would come after her money. These old romance scams are getting smarter. Poor Richard Carter must be rolling in his grave. That veteran saw dollar signs. I hope the boys stop him before it's too late. I kept scrolling. Every comment became a little crueler. Then one stopped me cold. I heard he planned this for years. I closed the phone. Lies spread so easily. Truth always seems to arrive out of breath. Behind me, the motel door opened. Evelyn stepped outside wearing jeans, boots, and one of my old army jackets. She smiled. You were always up before sunrise. I still am. She noticed my face immediately. What happened? I handed her the phone. She read silently, then handed it back. I shouldn't have looked. You didn't do anything wrong. I know. She looked toward the highway. But most people won't care. No. They've already decided. She took a deep breath. We still have work to do. I smiled. That's one of the reasons I married you. She laughed softly. You married a woman who works on her honeymoon. I married a rancher. Or our first stop was Carter National Bank. If Ryan had truly frozen financial transfers, Evelyn needed answers. The moment we walked inside, conversation stopped, not dramatically. Not all at once. Just enough to notice. The bank manager, Susan Reynolds, hurried toward us. Evelyn. She sounded genuinely uncomfortable. I was hoping you'd come in. I need access to my accounts. Susan hesitated. I'm afraid. I know. You've already received notice. Susan nodded. Late yesterday. Evelyn folded her hands calmly. I want to hear it anyway. The trust has been flagged. My personal accounts. Still active. The ranch operating accounts. Susan looked apologetic. Temporarily restricted pending the court hearing. Evelyn sighed. So Ryan can stop payroll. Only temporarily. Hell, try. Susan lowered her voice. I think he already has. That caught Evelyn's attention. What do you mean? Several payroll transfers scheduled for this morning were cancelled. Cancelled by whom? Susan didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ryan. The ranch employed nearly 80 people. Cowboys, mechanics, veterinarians, bookkeepers, maintenance crews. Most lived paycheck to paycheck. Ryan wasn't hurting Evelyn. He was hurting families. I watched Evelyn straighten her shoulders. He knows exactly what he's doing. Susan nodded sadly. I'm sorry. Evelyn smiled politely. This isn't your fault. No. But I wish I could help. You already have. As we turned to leave, an elderly man sitting in the lobby spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. Never thought I'd see the day. Neither of us answered. He continued anyway. Richard worked his whole life. Another voice joined him. And now some outsider gets everything. I stopped walking. Evelyn gently squeezed my hand. Keep going. I nodded. Sometimes dignity is choosing not to fight. By lunch at Grime. The rumors had grown. Everywhere we went, people looked. Some whispered. Some openly stared. At Miller's Hardware, the cashier avoided eye contact. At the pharmacy, conversation stopped as we entered. Outside the diner, two men actually laughed. One of them called out. How's retirement treating you now, millionaire? I kept walking. Evelyn didn't. She turned around. My husband earned every penny he's ever had. The man shrugged. Sure he did. His friend chuckled. I guess marrying rich counts as overtime. Before I could respond, a familiar voice interrupted. That's enough. Everyone turned. Frank Wilson. Gray-haired, broad shoulders, still walking with the slight limp he'd carried home from overseas. He stepped beside me. You boys ever wear this country's uniform? Neither answered. Frank looked at them for several long seconds. I didn't think so. The taller man scoffed. This doesn't concern you. It does now. Frank pointed toward me. This man carried wounded soldiers under fire. Silence. He missed his daughter's graduation because he was serving overseas. More silence. He buried friends whose names you don't even know. The men looked uncomfortable. Frank continued. If you think Michael Hayes married anybody for money. He shook his head. Then you never knew the man. Without another word, the two men walked away. Frank turned toward me. You okay? I've had tougher mornings. He smiled. I figured. Then, he hugged Evelyn. Congratulations. She laughed. You're one of the few people who've actually said that. You deserve happiness. So, does Michael. That afternoon. Judge Helen Brooks called. The hearing has been scheduled. When? 3 days. Evelyn looked at me. That's fast. Helen sighed. Ryan requested emergency status. Of course he did. He claims you're incapable of managing your affairs. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly. What else? There will be temporary restrictions until the judge rules. What restrictions? Helen hesitated. No major financial decisions. No land sales. No trust distributions. No operational authority over ranch assets. Evelyn nodded slowly. So my own ranch, she forced herself to finish, is no longer mine. Temporarily. Still. Helen's voice softened. Evelyn. What? Don't let Ryan make you angry. Why? Because he's counting on it. That evening, we sat outside the motel watching the sunset. It reminded us of evenings on the ranch. Only this view overlooked a parking lot instead of open pasture. Evelyn rested her head against my shoulder. I'm embarrassed. You shouldn't be. I've spent 40 years building a reputation. You still have it. She smiled sadly. Do I? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pointed across the road. A young family was unloading groceries. The father struggled with too many bags. His little girl laughed as oranges rolled across the pavement. Without thinking, Evelyn stood. She walked over, helped gather every orange, smiled at the little girl, then came back. Why did you do that? She looked surprised by the question. Because she needed help. I nodded. Exactly. She frowned. I don't understand. That's who you are. What does that have to do with anything? Reputation isn't built by newspaper headlines. She looked at me quietly. It's built by moments like that. She didn't speak again for a while. Then she slipped her hand into mine. Thank you. For what? For reminding me who I am. Two across town, Ryan sat inside his attorney's office. The lawyer slid a folder across the desk. The town is turning. Ryan smiled. Good. The rumors are helping. They're supposed to. The attorney hesitated. There is one problem. Ryan looked up. What? Your mother's military husband. What about him? He isn't fighting back. Ryan frowned. So, the lawyer leaned back. If he starts attacking you, the town picks sides. But if he keeps showing restraint, he tapped the folder. People may begin wondering why. Ryan's smile slowly disappeared. He hadn't considered that. Then another thought crossed his mind. Fine. If he won't fight, he looked out the office window. I'll make sure he has no choice. The next morning, someone painted 6 words across the front of my little cabin. G-O-H-M-G-E-L-D-D-I-G-E-R. And waiting inside my mailbox was an unsigned envelope. It contained only one photograph. A picture of Evelyn, taken through the window of our motel room. Someone wasn't just spreading rumors anymore. Someone was watching us. For a long time, I simply stared at the photograph. It had been taken from outside our motel room. The curtains were only half closed. Inside the picture, Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed reading paperwork. I stood near the window, talking on the phone. Neither of us had any idea someone was watching. There was no note, no signature, just the photograph, and on the back, 6 words written with a black marker. Yo you don't belong I turned the card over again. My first instinct wasn't fear. It was assessment. The handwriting was block lettering, deliberately disguised. The paper had been printed on cheap photo stock. No fingerprints that I could see. Old habits from army intelligence never completely disappear. Evelyn looked at me. What is it? I handed her the photograph. She studied it silently. Then her shoulders sank. They're following us. Looks that way. Ryan. I don't know. She looked up. You think he'd do something like this? I think someone wants us to believe he would. That answer surprised even me. Because deep down, I wasn't certain. Ryan was angry, vindictive, controlling. But was he the kind of man who would stalk his own mother? I honestly didn't know. An hour later we were sitting inside Sheriff Tom Lawson's office. Tom had known Evelyn for almost 30 years. He looked uncomfortable the moment he saw the photograph. When did this arrive? This morning. He examined both sides carefully. No return address. No witnesses. None. Tom leaned back. I wish I could tell you this is unusual. It isn't. He sighed. Not when lawsuits become public. Evelyn frowned. You've seen this before. Family inheritance cases can get ugly. Oogly enough for threats. He nodded slowly. Sometimes. He handed the picture back. I'll have my deputies ask around. You think they'll find anything? He didn't answer immediately. In a town this size, he finally shrugged. People usually know more than they admit. As we stood to leave, Tom stopped me. Michael. Yes. You carrying? I nodded. My concealed permit is current. Good. I hope I never need it. So do I. His expression turned serious. But until we know who's watching. He paused. Don't go anywhere alone. To news travels quickly in ranch country. By lunchtime, nearly everyone knew we'd gone to the sheriff. Unfortunately, that only fueled the rumors. According to the local coffee shop, Ryan had caught me stealing ranch documents. According to the barber, I'd threatened Ryan outside the courthouse. According to the grocery store, Evelyn was suffering from dementia and couldn't remember marrying me. Each version became more ridiculous than the last, yet people repeated them anyway. I stopped trying to defend myself. You can't outrun a lie that's changing every hour. That afternoon, Judge Helen Brooks invited us to her home. Not as a judge, as a friend. Her house sat on a quiet hill overlooking the river. Books covered nearly every wall. Photographs of 4 generations filled the hallway. She poured coffee before anyone spoke. Finally, she looked at Evelyn. I need to ask you something difficult. Evelyn nodded. Go ahead. Shez, your memory changed. Evelyn blinked. What? I know the answer. But the court will ask. She nodded slowly. No. You've never forgotten major business decisions. No. You've never become confused managing ranch finances. No. Nook. You've never been diagnosed with cognitive decline. Never. Helen wrote several notes. Then she turned toward me. And you? What about me? Ryan's attorneys will claim you manipulated her. I expected that. They'll examine your finances. I've already provided everything. They'll question your military record. I have nothing to hide. They'll investigate every relationship you've ever had. I smiled faintly. They're welcome to. Helen looked directly into my eyes. Can you stay calm? I believe so. You'll have to. She folded her hands. Because Ryan's biggest advantage, she paused, is convincing everyone you're exactly what he says you are. A gold digger, yes. And how do I prove I'm not? You don't. That answer surprised me. Helen continued. You kufu you are. Bartro, that evening, I drove alone to my cabin. Sheriff Lawson insisted on sending a deputy. I told him it wasn't necessary. He insisted anyway. The spray paint across the front wall had already dried. Go called DGGR. The deputy shook his head. Kids. You think so? Maybe. I wasn't convinced. The letters were perfectly straight. Measured. Someone had taken their time. Inside, everything looked untouched. Furniture exactly where I'd left it. Books still on the shelves. My old army medals inside their display case. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. Until I reached the bedroom. One drawer had been opened. Only one. Inside, my old military photographs had been scattered across the floor. Pictures from Germany, Iraq, Afghanistan, training exercises, promotion ceremonies. Someone had looked through them carefully, then left. The deputy frowned. Anything missing? I knelt down, gathered each photograph, one by one. Then I froze. There should have been another picture. One taken almost 25 years earlier, a hunting trip. Several local volunteers. A teenage boy with a broken leg. The photograph was gone. Only that one. Nothing else. The deputy noticed. What is it? Someone took a picture. Important. I honestly don't know. I searched every drawer, every folder, every box. Gone. Just one photograph. It bothered me more than the graffiti. Who breaks into a house just to steal a single picture? To that night, back at the motel, Evelyn was asleep before 10. I couldn't sleep. Instead, I sat outside watching the parking lot. Around midnight, a pickup truck rolled slowly past. Didn't stop. Just slowed. Its headlights lingered on our room. Then it continued down the highway. 10 minutes later, it came back. This time, it stopped across the road. The engine idled. No lights. I quietly stood. The driver must have noticed. The truck pulled away immediately. Too quickly. I memorized what I could. Dark blue Ford. Older model. Missing left taillight. No front license plate. Not much. But enough. 2-2. The following morning, Ryan held a press conference. He didn't invite us. He didn't have to. Every local news station showed up anyway. Standing in front of the courthouse, he looked directly into the cameras. My mother deserves protection. He sounded calm, concerned, almost heartbroken. I believe she's being manipulated during a vulnerable stage of life. One reporter asked the obvious question. Do you believe Michael Hayes married her for financial gain? Ryan paused. Just long enough. I pray I'm wrong. Another reporter asked whether he loved his mother. More than anything. Then why sue her? He lowered his eyes. Sometimes protecting someone means making difficult decisions. By evening, half the county believed he was the devoted son, and I was the stranger trying to steal everything. What Ryan didn't know was that Sheriff Lawson had already identified the owner of the dark blue pickup, and when he called me just before sunset, his first words sent a chill through me. Michael? Yes. The truck doesn't belong to Ryan. Then who? It belongs to someone who disappeared. He took a slow breath. 23 years ago. I didn't answer right away. For a second, I thought I'd heard Sheriff Lawson wrong. What do you mean, disappeared? Tom's voice stayed steady. I mean exactly that. You identified the truck. I did. And the owner has been missing for 23 years. Officially. I looked over at Evelyn. She was sitting across the motel room reading through another stack of legal papers. She noticed my expression immediately. What happened? I raised one finger. Tom, start from the beginning. The sheriff took a slow breath. The truck is registered to a man named Charles Benton. The name meant nothing to me. I don't know him. You probably wouldn't. He worked around here. He used to. What happened? He disappeared. When? 23 years ago, without a trace. Mostly. I frowned. Mostly. There was never a body. So he could still be alive. Anything's possible. The sheriff paused. But that's not the strange part. I waited. The registration has been renewed every year. I blinked. How? That's exactly what we're trying to figure out. Sidaski an hour later, Evelyn and I were sitting inside the sheriff's office. Tom laid an old file on the desk. The folder looked worn. Edges yellowed with age. Someone had opened it hundreds of times. Charles Benton was 41. Tom slid over a photograph. Lean, sun-weathered face, cowboy hat, kind eyes. He worked on several ranches. Evelyn suddenly leaned forward. I remember him. Tom nodded. I thought you might. He worked here one summer. One Richard was expanding the south pasture. She looked closer at the photograph. He was quiet, reliable, good with horses. Tom turned another page. Then one morning, never showed up. No. His truck, missing. His bank account, untouched. Family, none nearby. I looked at the paperwork, so everyone assumed he left. Tom shook his head, but nobody ever proved it. Something didn't feel right. If he disappeared, I asked, who's driving his truck now? Tom folded his arms. We don't know. Can you trace it? We're trying. But the registration address hasn't changed. Where is it? Tom slid another paper toward us. I read the location. My stomach tightened. The address wasn't in another county. It wasn't even another town. It was less than 4 miles from Carter Ranch. On the drive back, neither Evelyn nor I spoke much. Finally, she broke the silence. You think Ryan hired someone? I don't know. You think this Charles Benton is alive? I don't know. She smiled faintly. You've said, I don't know, a lot today. I've learned that's usually more honest than pretending. She reached over and squeezed my hand. One of the reasons I married you. The courthouse hearing was only 2 days away. Ryan wasn't slowing down. Neither were his lawyers. By noon, another motion had been filed. This one requested that Evelyn undergo a full psychological evaluation. She read it twice, then quietly placed it on the motel table. My own son wants strangers deciding whether I know my own name. I sat beside her. He wants control? No. She looked out the window. He wants certainty. What do you mean? I can't stand uncertainty. She smiled sadly. His father was the same way. If Richard wanted something, he couldn't sleep until he had it. You think Ryan inherited that? I know he did. Then later that afternoon, we met with our attorney, Linda Foster. 60, 2 years old, sharp, direct, the kind of woman who could silence a courtroom without raising her voice. She spread the legal documents across a conference table. The good news, she began, is Ryan's case isn't nearly as strong as he's pretending. The bad news, public opinion. I nodded. We've noticed. She pointed toward the competency petition. Judges don't decide cases based on gossip. But they're human. She looked at Evelyn. If enough people start believing you're confused. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Linda opened another folder. I've interviewed 16 people. About what? Your relationship? Evelyn looked surprised. So quickly. I don't waste time. She smiled slightly. Do you know how many people described Michael as someone chasing money? I shook my head. None. That caught my attention. Linda continued. Every person said roughly the same thing. She flipped through her notes. Quiet. Proud. Too stubborn to ask for help. Lives within his means. Volunteers at the Veterans Center. Fixes fences without charging neighbors. She smiled. Those witnesses matter. Evelyn looked relieved for the first time in days. But Ryan has more lawyers. Linda nodded. He does. But truth has a habit of surviving longer than strategy. That evening, Frank Wilson stopped by the motel. He carried 2 paper bags. Dinner. I laughed. You didn't have to. I know. He pulled out containers of fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and peach cobbler. The diner owner insisted. I looked surprised. The same diner where those men mocked me. Frank nodded. Word travels both ways. He sat down. You know. He looked at Evelyn. People are starting to ask questions. What kind? Ryan talks a lot. So, you don't. He looked at me. Folks are beginning to notice. I smiled. I've never believed in arguing with rumors. Frank grinned. My grandfather used to say. He pointed his fork toward me. A lie sprints. Truth saddles its horse. I like that. He was smarter than me. We all laughed. For a few minutes. It almost felt like life before the wedding. Just before sunset, Sheriff Lawson called again. This time we found something. What? The registration renewals. Go on. They've all been paid in cash. Every year. Every single year. No checks. No credit cards. No electronic records. Nothing. I looked at Evelyn. Tom continued. One more thing. What? The woman working at the DMV recognized the man. My pulse quickened. She remembers seeing him. No. Then who? She remembers seeing someone else renew the registration? Woo! There was a long pause. She identified him from a photo lineup this afternoon. My grip tightened around the phone. Tom's voice became almost a whisper. She identified Ryan Carter. I slowly lowered the phone. Evelyn searched my face. What happened? I looked directly into her eyes. The sheriff says. I swallowed hard. Ryan has been secretly renewing the registration for a truck belonging to a man who disappeared 23 years ago. Silence filled the room. Neither of us understood why. But somewhere, hidden inside a 23-year-old disappearance, was a secret Ryan had spent decades protecting. And for the first time since our wedding. I wasn't sure the ranch was what this fight was really about. The room stayed quiet long after I ended the call. Evelyn sat across from me, her hands folded in her lap. Finally, she asked the only question that mattered. Why? I shook my head. I honestly don't know. Ryan was 20 years old 23 years ago. About that. He was still in college. Wes! She frowned. Why would a 20-year-old keep renewing the registration on a missing man's truck for over 2 decades? I can't think of a single innocent explanation. Neither could she. The next morning, Sheriff Tom Lawson met us at the courthouse before our meeting with attorney Linda Foster. He looked like he hadn't slept. I dug a little deeper. What did you find? I asked. The truck registration wasn't the only thing Ryan handled. Tom handed me a photocopy, an old insurance policy, Charles Benton. The mailing address had been changed 18 years earlier, Changed by power of attorney. I looked up. Ryan had power of attorney over Charles Benton. Tom shook his head. No. Then how? The signature authorizing the change has disappeared from the file. Disappeared. The page is missing. Linda, who had just joined us, frowned. Pages don't simply disappear from county records. Tom gave a tired smile. They're not supposed to. Sue. The courthouse hallway buzzed with reporters. Our hearing wasn't until the following morning, but everyone wanted a statement. Microphones appeared the moment Evelyn stepped out of the elevator. Messes. Carter, do you believe your son is stealing from you? Is your husband controlling your decisions? Are you willing to undergo a mental examination? Evelyn kept walking. One reporter shouted another question. Mr. Hayes, did you sign a prenuptial agreement? I stopped. Every camera turned toward me. Yes. The hallway became strangely quiet. Another reporter blinked. You did. I insisted on one. Why? Because I never wanted anyone believing I married Evelyn for money. Can you describe the agreement? I can. I looked directly into the cameras. If Evelyn dies before me, I paused. I inherit nothing from the Carter estate. Murmurs spread through the hallway. The ranch belongs to her family. It always will. Another reporter quickly asked. Nothing at all. I keep my pension, my cabin, my pickup, and the ring on my finger. Nothing else. The cameras kept rolling. I wasn't trying to win anyone over. I was simply telling the truth. Inside the conference room, Linda smiled for the first time in days. You should have warned me. About what? The prenuptial agreement. I didn't think it mattered. It matters now. Evelyn looked at me. You never told anyone. There wasn't any reason to. Linda laughed softly. Ryan's entire public argument depends on you chasing money. She tapped the table. You just destroyed that narrative. I wasn't thinking about strategy. I know. She smiled again. That's why people believed you. Ouch. Unfortunately, Ryan believed he could recover. By lunchtime, he held another press conference. The prenup proves nothing. A reporter challenged him. Doesn't it eliminate financial motive? Ryan shook his head. No. Then why marry her? He answered without hesitation. Influence. The ranch. Public image. Hell convinced my mother to rewrite her estate plan. One reporter asked. Has she? Ryan looked caught off guard. No. Has she even discussed changing her will? No. Then what evidence do you have? Ryan's jaw tightened. I know how people like him operate. That answer didn't land the way he'd hoped. The questions became sharper. For the first time, Ryan left a press conference looking defensive. Too late that afternoon, Sheriff Lawson called again. I found the truck. I nearly dropped the phone. What? The blue Ford. We're abandoned. We're. Tom hesitated. You aren't going to like this. Tell me. It was hidden inside an old equipment barn. Whose property? Long silence. Then, the south pasture. I felt my stomach tighten. The Carter Ranch. Yes. I looked across the room at Evelyn. She immediately knew something had changed. What happened? I covered the phone. They found the truck. Her face went pale. On my ranch. I nodded slowly. Within an hour. We stood outside the abandoned equipment barn. Crime scene tape surrounded the entrance. Deputies moved quietly between old tractors and rusting machinery. The truck sat in the far corner beneath decades of dust, dark blue. Missing left taillight, exactly as I'd seen it. It hadn't been driven recently. Spider webs stretched from the mirrors to the wall. Dust covered every window. Tom walked beside me. It wasn't here yesterday. I looked at him. What? My deputies checked this barn 2 days ago. And the truck wasn't here. I stared at the vehicle. Someone moved it, recently, without anyone noticing. Tom nodded. This ranch has thousands of acres. Too many places to hide. Evelyn walked slowly toward the truck. She touched the dusty hood. I've owned this land for 40 years. She whispered. And someone hid this here without me knowing. A deputy approached. Sheriff. What is it? We found something inside. He held up a weathered leather wallet. Tom carefully opened it. Driver's license. Charles Benton, social security card, old family photographs, Everything looked untouched. Then, folded behind one photograph, was a single handwritten receipt. Tom unfolded it. His expression changed instantly. "What?" I asked. He handed it to me. The receipt was dated 23 years earlier. Payment received, 40 head of cattle. Seller Charles Benton. Buyer Richard Carter. Evelyn frowned. "My husband bought cattle from Charles all the time." I nodded. "So why keep the receipt?" Tom pointed toward the bottom. There was a handwritten note. Not part of the original receipt. Just 4 words. "If anything happens." Then an arrow. And beneath it, "Dig below marker 7. No signature. Nothing else." Every deputy looked at one another. Evelyn whispered, "Marker 7. I looked toward the endless pastures stretching across the ranch. Old ranchers often used numbered survey markers. Boundary posts, water lines, fence references. There could be dozens. Maybe hundreds. Tom folded the receipt carefully. "We're getting a warrant." I frowned. "A warrant? To excavate? You think something's buried?" He looked at me. "I think Charles Benton expected someone to find this. And if he did..." Tom glanced toward the open pasture beyond the barn. "He wanted them digging." Row E across town, Ryan received a phone call. His attorney spoke only 6 words. "They found the truck." Ryan stood so quickly his chair fell backward. "What?" "They found it." "Where?" The attorney answered. "On your mother's ranch." Ryan's face drained of color. For the first time in years, the confident eldest son looked genuinely frightened. "What else?" "They're searching the property." Ryan whispered something under his breath, then slammed his fist against the wall. "No." His attorney frowned. "Ryan," he closed his eyes. "They can't find marker 7. The attorney stared. "What is marker 7? Ryan slowly opened his eyes. And for the first time, he realized the secret his father had buried 23 years ago was no longer buried safely. The sun hadn't fully risen when the excavation team arrived. 2 sheriff's deputies, 3 county investigators, a surveyor, and 1 old ranch foreman named Earl Jenkins. If anyone knew where the original survey markers were, it was Earl. He climbed out of his pickup carrying a rolled-up map that looked almost as old as he was. "I haven't seen this thing in 15 years, he said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "My father drew that map." "I know." He carefully spread it across the hood of his truck. The paper was yellow, the edges brittle. Every pasture, creek, and fence line had been hand-drawn decades earlier. Earl traced one weathered finger across the map. Marker 1. He moved farther south. 2. Then west. 3. The investigators leaned closer. "What about 7? Earl frowned. "It should be..." His finger stopped. "Right here." He looked up toward the southern pasture. "Near the old cottonwood trees." Sheriff Lawson nodded. "Let's go." The drive took nearly 20 minutes. The Carter Ranch wasn't simply large. It was enormous. Rolling hills, grazing fields, creeks winding through oak trees, miles of fencing. This land had supported generations. When we finally stopped, only one ancient cottonwood remained standing. Lightning had split the other years earlier. Earl climbed out slowly. "I haven't walked this part of the ranch since Richard was alive." He looked around. "Something's wrong." "What?" "What?" The marker. "What about it?" "It should be visible." Instead, there was only freshly turned dirt. Someone had dug here recently. Not deeply, just enough to disturb the ground. Sheriff Lawson crouched. His fingers touched the soil. "It's fresh." "How fresh?" He looked toward one of his deputies. "Maybe 48 hours. My mind immediately went to Ryan. He'd known about the truck. He'd known about the registration. Had he known about marker 7 too? The excavation began. Nobody spoke much. The only sounds were shovels biting into the earth and the distant calls of cattle. After 15 minutes, one deputy stopped. "I hit something." Everyone gathered around. Carefully, they brushed away the dirt. A wooden box, about 3 feet long, weathered, water-damaged, but intact. Tom looked at Evelyn. "I need your permission." She nodded. "It's my land." The sheriff lifted the lid. Inside, there wasn't gold. No stacks of cash, no hidden jewelry, just papers. Dozens of neatly wrapped documents inside oilcloth. Tom carefully removed the first bundle. Every page had been protected from moisture. The handwriting looked familiar. Evelyn stepped forward. "Oh my God." "What? That's Richard's handwriting?" She picked up the first page. It wasn't a letter. It was a ledger. Dates, cattle sales, land purchases, equipment expenses, nothing unusual. Then she reached the final page. Her face lost all color. "What is it?" She handed the notebook to Tom. At the bottom, Richard Carter had written one sentence. If these records are found, Charles was telling the truth. No one spoke. Tom opened the next bundle. More ledgers. Then another. Then a sealed envelope. Across the front, in fading ink, 3 names had been written. Richard Carter, Charles Benton, Judge Helen Brooks. Tom frowned. Helen. He carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a signed agreement. 23 years old. It described a land dispute. Nothing criminal. Nothing about missing people. Just a disagreement over ownership of nearly 200 acres near the South pasture. Evelyn looked confused. "I've never seen this." Tom nodded slowly. Apparently very few people did. He turned the final page. There, beneath 3 signatures, one signature was missing. Richard Carter. Signed, Judge Helen Brooks. Signed as witness, Charles Benton, blank. Tuku within the hour. Judge Helen Brooks was standing beside the open excavation site. She looked at the documents, then quietly sat on a fallen log. I wondered if these still existed. Tom looked surprised. "You knew?" "I knew Richard prepared them." "Why weren't they filed?" Helen closed her eyes. "Because Charles disappeared." Silence settled over the pasture. She continued. "The agreement would have settled the land dispute permanently." "So, why didn't it?" "Because Charles never came back to sign." Tom asked the question everyone was thinking. Did Richard have anything to do with Charles disappearing? Helen looked genuinely shocked. "No." "You sound certain." "I am." "How?" She looked toward Evelyn. "Because Richard spent almost a year looking for him." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I remember. He hired search teams, private investigators, even offered a reward." Tom frowned. "Then why hide these papers?" Helen sighed. "Richard thought if Charles ever returned." She looked at the unsigned agreement. "He'd be able to finish what they started." The discovery made local news before sunset. Unfortunately, the headlines weren't interested in the truth. Hidden documents found on Carter Ranch. Decades. Old mystery reopened. Marriage dispute now linked to missing ranch hand. By evening, speculation had exploded. Some blamed Richard Carter. Others blamed Ryan. A few even suggested I had planted the evidence. Rumors never need proof. Only an audience. Pasha Ryan watched the news alone in his office. His attorney stood beside the television. "This is getting out of control." Ryan didn't answer. "They're reopening the Benton investigation." Still nothing. "Ryan." Finally, he spoke. "They weren't supposed to find the box." "You knew it existed." Ryan slowly rubbed his forehead. "What if father mentioned it once?" "What exactly did he say?" "He told me," Ryan swallowed, "that if anyone ever found the records." He looked toward the window. "The family would be torn apart." His attorney stared. "What did he mean?" "I don't know." "You're sure?" Ryan didn't answer. That night, Evelyn and I returned to the motel. Neither of us had much appetite. We sat outside watching the sunset disappear behind the hills. "It feels strange," she said. "What does?" "Defending Richard." I looked at her. "You still believe in him?" "Yes." "Even now?" She nodded without hesitation. "My husband made mistakes. So have I. But he wasn't cruel." She looked toward the dark outline of the ranch in the distance. "I refuse to believe he hurt Charles Benton." I placed my hand over hers. "We'll find out." She smiled sadly. "I'm afraid we will." Late tea, just after midnight, Sheriff Lawson called again. His voice sounded different. Urgent. They identified something in the ledger. "What?" "One payment." "So?" "It doesn't match any Carter Ranch records." I sat up. "How much?" $150. "And paid to whom?" Tom took a slow breath. "The initials are all we have." "What initials?" "RC, I frowned. "Richard Carter." That's what everyone assumed. But, Tom's voice became almost a whisper, "There's another man with those same initials." "Ooh, Ryan Carter." I stared into the darkness outside the motel window. 23 years ago, Ryan had only been 20, too young to run the ranch, too young to run the business. So why would a missing ranch hand have recorded a payment to him? And why had someone gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one ever asked that question? Chapter 8. A debt no one knew about. Sleep never came. I spent most of the night sitting in the old wooden chair beside the motel window. The numbers kept turning over in my mind. $150,000. 23 years ago. Back then, that kind of money could change a person's life, or destroy it. By 6 a.m, Sheriff Tom Lawson called again. I've been thinking. So have I. I don't believe the payment was made to Ryan. I frowned. You just told me the initials matched. They do. But something doesn't fit. What? Tom sighed. A 20-year-old college kid didn't have $150,000. Nup. And he certainly wasn't buying cattle. So what are you thinking? I think Charles wrote the initials for someone else. There isn't another RC in the Carter family. No. But there are plenty outside it. The possibility made sense. Unfortunately, it also widened the mystery instead of narrowing it. Too later that morning, Linda Foster met us outside the courthouse. She carried 2 thick binders. The competency hearing starts in 30 minutes. Evelyn nodded. How bad? Linda didn't sugarcoat it. Ryan's attorney is very good. I expected that. They've hired a neurologist. I've never met him. You don't have to. He reviewed your medical records. Evelyn looked annoyed. How? The court authorized limited access. She took a slow breath. So a man who's never spoken to me? She shook her head. Is prepared to tell a judge whether I'm capable of running my own life. Linda nodded. Essentially, I spoke for the first time. And our side? Linda smiled. We have something better. What? The truth. The courtrooms have their own kind of silence, not peaceful, heavy. Every cough echoes. Every chair sounds too loud. Ryan sat at the opposite table wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my pickup truck. Derek sat behind him. Unlike his brother, he couldn't seem to meet his mother's eyes. Judge Martha Ellis entered precisely at 9. She was known for 2 things: patience and a complete lack of interest in courtroom theatrics. After everyone was sworn in, Ryan's attorney stood. Your Honor, this case concerns an elderly widow who has experienced a dramatic personality change. I glanced at Evelyn. She remained perfectly still. The attorney continued. Within a short period, Mrs. Carter entered into marriage, altered her daily routines, and began relying heavily upon a man who appeared unexpectedly in her life. Linda didn't object. She simply took notes. The attorney called his medical expert. The neurologist testified about aging, memory, decision-making, general cognitive decline. Everything sounded impressive, until Judge Ellis interrupted. Doctor. Yes, Your Honor. Have you ever examined Mrs. Carter? No. Have you spoken to her? No. Then your testimony is limited to general medical principles. Correct. Judge Ellis nodded. Thank you. His impact had just been cut in half. Then it was Evelyn's turn. She walked to the witness stand without hesitation. Linda smiled. Mrs. Carter. Good morning. How long have you managed Carter Ranch? 42 years. How many acres? Just under 8,000. Number of employees? 83. Current cattle inventory? Approximately 4,600 head. Outstanding bank loans? She answered the exact dollar amount, without notes, without hesitation. Linda asked another. Current oil lease revenue? Another exact answer. What was your ranch's net operating income last year? Again precise. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Linda wasn't finished. What was the weather on your wedding day? Evelyn smiled. Sunny. High of 82. A little wind from the west. Some people in the courtroom laughed softly. Linda looked toward the judge. Your Honor. She smiled. I have no further questions. Ryan's attorney stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Carter, you love your new husband. I do. Very much. Yes. So much that you do anything for him. The attorney blinked. No, I do what's right, even if it hurt him. She answered without hesitation. Especially if it hurt him. The attorney changed direction. Did Michael encourage you to marry? Nook? Who proposed? I did. Several reporters looked up. The attorney frowned. You proposed? Yes. What exactly did you say? Evelyn smiled toward me. I asked him if he was planning to grow old alone. A few people chuckled. And his answer? He said. She laughed, quietly. Only if you say no? Even Judge Ellis smiled. Ryan didn't. Then something happened that none of us expected. Judge Ellis closed the file. I have a question of my own. The courtroom became still. She looked directly at Evelyn. Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. If this court rules in your favor. She paused. What do you intend to do about your sons? Everyone waited. Even Ryan. Even Derek. Evelyn looked toward both of them. Her eyes filled with tears. I'll invite them home. The courtroom fell completely silent. They're still my boys. She swallowed hard. They've made terrible choices. But they're still my family. Ryan looked away. For the first time since this nightmare began, he looked ashamed. Only for a moment. But I saw it. The hearing ended just before noon. Judge Ellis announced she'd issue a written ruling within 48 hours. Outside, reporters surrounded us again. This time the questions were different. Mrs. Carter, how did you remember so many financial details? Mr. Hayes, is reconciliation still possible? I answered honestly. I hope so. No one expected that answer, including Ryan. As everyone began leaving, Derek quietly walked toward me. No cameras nearby, no reporters, just the two of us. I need to ask you something. Go ahead. He looked nervous. Did you really sign a prenup? I did. And you don't inherit anything? That's correct. He stared at me for several seconds, then quietly said, I didn't know. I figured. He rubbed the back of his neck. Ryan told me something different. What did he tell you? That you demanded half the ranch. I couldn't help smiling. I've never asked for a single acre. Derek looked genuinely confused. Then he stopped himself. What? I don't understand why Ryan would lie. Before I could answer, Ryan appeared across the courthouse steps. Derek. His younger brother turned immediately. We're meeting. Derek looked back at me. There was uncertainty in his eyes now. Not anger, not hatred. Doubt. Exactly the thing Ryan feared most. Too late that afternoon, Sheriff Lawson called once more. His voice sounded excited. We found Charles Benton's bank records. You did? One transaction finally makes sense. What transaction? The $150,000. I grabbed a notebook. Who paid it? It wasn't a payment. What do you mean? It was a loan. A loan? Yes. Made by Charles Benton. To whom? Tom hesitated. That's the surprising part. I waited. The loan wasn't made to Richard Carter. Then who? It was made to. He paused. Evelyn? I froze. What? The documents are clear. The money went directly into Evelyn Carter's personal account. I slowly turned toward Evelyn. She was sitting only a few feet away. She had heard every word. Her face had gone completely pale. She whispered only 4 words. I never borrowed it. And for the first time, the mystery wasn't just connected to the Carter family anymore. It was connected directly to my wife. The room became so quiet I could hear the old motel refrigerator humming against the wall. Evelyn didn't move. She didn't blink. She simply stared at Sheriff Lawson's phone sitting on the table. I never borrowed it. Tom heard her. I believe you. She looked up. You do? I've known you almost 30 years. He paused. You've forgotten birthdays. You've forgotten where you left your reading glasses. But you've never forgotten writing a 6-figure check. Linda Foster reached for the phone. Tom, tell us exactly what you found. The county archive located copies of Benton's financial records. Original copies. As original as we're likely to get. The loan was documented. That's signed. That's the strange part. Linda frowned. What do you mean? There are signatures. But they don't match. Zapped within an hour. The 4 of us were gathered in the sheriff's evidence room. Tom carefully placed the documents on the table. One was a handwritten loan agreement. Another was a cancelled cashier's check. The third was a deposit slip. Linda studied them quietly. Finally, She looked at Evelyn. The money really was deposited into your personal account. Evelyn frowned. I never saw it. The bank says you did. I would have remembered. Linda nodded. I think you would have. She slid the papers toward me. Michael. What? Look at the signatures. I compared them. The signature on the deposit slip looked like Evelyn Carter. Neat. Confident. The signature on the loan agreement looked forced. Almost practiced. Like someone trying too hard. I'm no handwriting expert. Linda smiled. You don't have to be. Something feels wrong. It does. Tom opened another folder. We already sent copies to the state lab. How long? A few days. Linda nodded. Good. If those signatures don't match. She looked at Evelyn. Someone committed fraud. The question was obvious. If Evelyn never asked for the money, I said. Where did it go? Tom answered before anyone else. That's exactly what we've been asking. He turned another page. The money entered Evelyn's account. And it left 2 hours later. Transferred? No. Cashier's check? Payable to? Tom looked down. The pay line is blank. Linda frowned. Blank. The original was removed. Convenient. Tom nodded. Very. Evelyn leaned back in her chair. I don't understand. What? My husband handled very little of my personal banking. She looked at Linda. I always reviewed every transaction. Linda folded her arms. Except this one. I suppose. She closed her eyes. 23 years, she whispered. And I never noticed. I reached across the table and gently took her hand. This isn't your fault. She smiled sadly. Maybe not. But it happened under my roof. Seek that afternoon. News spread that investigators had uncovered financial records connected to Charles Benton. Nobody knew the details. But that didn't stop the speculation. Some believed Richard Carter had stolen the money. Others insisted Evelyn had secretly paid Benton to disappear. One radio host suggested the ranch had been built on fraud. By evening, every version was different. Every version was wrong. Frank Wilson stopped by the motel after dinner. He carried another paper bag. I figured you two forgot to eat. He wasn't wrong. This time it was homemade beef stew. His wife had sent fresh bread too. Evelyn smiled. You keep rescuing us. Frank shrugged. That's what neighbors are supposed to do. He looked at me. Mind if I ask something? Go ahead. How are you holding up? I thought about the question, then answered honestly. I've been shot at. I've buried friends. I've spent months away from home. Frank nodded. So, this feels different. Why? Because I know who the enemy was in those situations. I looked toward the motel window. This time. I honestly don't. The following morning. Judge Martha Ellis issued her ruling. The courtroom filled long before she entered. Ryan sat beside his attorneys. He looked confident again. Derek looked exhausted. Evelyn squeezed my hand beneath the table. Judge Ellis opened the file. The court has reviewed testimony. She spoke calmly, methodically. After nearly 20 minutes, she reached her conclusion. The petition seeking temporary removal of Evelyn Carter's decision-making authority. Ryan leaned forward. Is denied. A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Judge Ellis wasn't finished. The court finds no credible evidence that Mrs. Carter lacks the capacity to manage her personal or business affairs. Evelyn quietly closed her eyes, not in celebration, in relief. The temporary restrictions imposed on Carter Ranch are lifted immediately. Ryan's shoulders dropped. The trust shall return to its original operational structure. Then Judge Ellis looked directly at Ryan. Family disagreement does not equal legal incompetence. Her voice became firmer. This court will not be used as a weapon in inheritance disputes. The gavel struck once. The hearing was over. For outside, reporters surrounded Evelyn. Mrs. Carter, how do you feel? She smiled politely. I'd like to go home. It was the simplest answer she'd given in days. And somehow, the most powerful. An hour later, we drove through the front gates of Carter Ranch together. The chains were gone. The padlock had been cut away by sheriff's deputies. As we rolled down the long gravel drive, employees began stepping out of barns, workshops, horse stables. Nobody cheered. Nobody applauded. Instead, One by one, cowboys tipped their hats, mechanics waved. The ranch cook stood on the porch wiping tears from her face. Old Earl Jenkins removed his cap completely. "Welcome home, Miss Evelyn." She smiled through tears. "It's good to be home." A thin Earl looked at me. "And welcome home." He extended his weathered hand. "Mr. Hayes." It was the first time anyone on the ranch had called me that. I shook his hand. "Thank you." For the first time since our wedding, it finally felt like we belonged. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the western hills, Evelyn and I sat on the same porch where our friendship had first begun. 2 glasses of iced tea rested on the railing. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't need to. Home has a way of quieting a tired heart. Then, the silence was broken by the sound of tires on gravel. A sheriff's cruiser stopped in front of the house. Tom stepped out carrying a sealed evidence bag. "I wish this could wait until tomorrow." I stood. "What happened?" He held up the bag. "The handwriting lab called. So soon. They expedited it." Evelyn joined us on the porch. Tom looked from her to me, then slowly said the words neither of us expected. "The signature on the loan agreement." He paused. "Wasn't forged by a stranger." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Tom handed me the report. "The handwriting expert believes." He took a slow breath. "It was written by someone who had spent years copying Evelyn's signature." I looked up. "Someone close to her." Tom nodded. "Close enough to watch her sign documents." He swallowed. Over and over again. Evelyn's face slowly drained of color. Only 3 people had ever handled that much of her paperwork. Richard, her longtime accountant, and Ryan. There are discoveries that make you angry. There are others that simply leave you numb. This one left Evelyn staring at the porch floor for nearly a full minute. Finally, she whispered, "No." Sheriff Tom Lawson didn't interrupt. Neither did I. She slowly looked up. "I taught both my boys how to sign their names." Her voice cracked. I sat at the kitchen table with them. I remember Ryan insisting his capital R looked more grown up. She managed a weak smile. He practiced for weeks. Then the smile disappeared. "You're telling me?" She swallowed. "That same little boy may have spent years learning to copy mine." Tom spoke carefully. "The handwriting expert isn't saying Ryan definitely wrote it. But the report says whoever wrote that signature had extensive familiarity with your handwriting." Linda Foster arrived just then, having driven straight from her office after Tom called. She read the report in silence. When she finished, she looked at Evelyn. "How many people regularly handled your financial paperwork 23 years ago?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "My husband, our accountant, and Ryan." "What about Derek?" "He was away at college, so he rarely saw business documents." "Very rarely." Linda nodded. "Then our list is very short." That evening, for the first time since returning home, Evelyn walked into Richard's old study. She hadn't spent much time there since his death. The room still smelled faintly of leather and cedar. His reading glasses rested exactly where he'd left them years earlier. His favorite fountain pen sat inside a wooden holder. Nothing had moved. She opened the top drawer. Inside were dozens of old ledgers, tax returns, cancelled checks, property maps, everything Richard insisted on keeping. "I used to tease him." She smiled sadly. "He never threw away a piece of paper." I gently ran my fingers across one of the binders. "Sometimes that's a blessing." We spent the next 3 hours searching. Most of the records matched what investigators had already found. Until Evelyn pulled a thin black notebook from the back of a shelf. "I've never seen this before." The cover wasn't labeled. Inside, Richard had written only brief notes, appointments, phone numbers, reminders, nothing unusual. Then Evelyn stopped turning pages. "Michael." "What?" She pointed to an entry dated 23 years earlier. Only one sentence. "Ryan insists Charles will understand." That was it. No explanation. No names beyond that. Just 7 words. "Ryan insists Charles will understand." I looked at Evelyn. "What do you make of it?" She slowly shook her head. "I don't know. But Richard almost never wrote people's first names. So why write Ryan's?" She closed the notebook. "Because it mattered." Right across town, Ryan sat alone in his office. His attorney closed the door behind him. The competency case is over. I know. You lost. I know. You need to stop. Ryan stared out the window. I can't. His attorney sighed. Why not? Because if I stop now. Ryan rubbed both hands across his face. Everything falls apart. What exactly falls apart? Ryan didn't answer. The attorney waited. Finally, Ryan quietly said, My father made promises. What promises? I can't tell you. Ryan, I can't. The attorney leaned forward. If you're protecting your father's reputation. Ryan interrupted him. I'm protecting my mother. The attorney frowned. By suing her? Ryan looked exhausted. You don't understand. Then help me. Ryan's eyes filled with something I hadn't expected. Fear. Real fear. If the truth comes out, he whispered, she'll never forgive herself. Whistle. The next morning, Derek showed up at the ranch. Alone. No lawyer, no reporters, no Ryan. One of the ranch hands called the house. Mr. Hayes? Yes. Ryan's brother is here. I looked at Evelyn. She nodded. Let him come. A few minutes later, Derek stood awkwardly on the porch. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. I don't know if you want to see me. Evelyn walked forward before I could speak. She hugged him. Without hesitation. Without conditions, he stood frozen for several seconds. Then slowly, he hugged her back. I'm sorry, Mom. She smiled through tears. I know. No. He stepped back. You don't. I should have asked questions. I should have listened. He looked down at the porch. I believed Ryan. Evelyn gently touched his cheek. He's your brother. I know. You trusted him. I did. That isn't a crime. He shook his head. It feels like one. Feels together around the kitchen table. The same table where Evelyn had once helped two little boys with homework. The same table where birthday cakes had been cut. Where Christmas dinners had been shared. Now it felt like neutral ground. Derek wrapped both hands around a coffee mug. I need to tell you something. Nobody interrupted. Ryan has been acting strangely. How? He keeps visiting Dad's old hunting cabin. Evelyn frowned. We sold that cabin years ago. I know. Then why go there? He says he's checking the fences. I looked at Derek. You don't believe him. Nuke. Why not? Because there aren't any fences. Silence, he continued. I followed him once. What happened? He stayed inside for almost 2 hours. Did you go in? No. Why not? He locked the door. Evelyn looked genuinely confused. There was never anything valuable in that cabin. Derek nodded. I know. Then why keep going? I don't know. But before anyone could say another word, Frank Wilson's truck came flying up the driveway faster than I'd ever seen. He slammed on the brakes, jumped out, and started running toward the porch. Michael, what happened? He was breathing hard. It's Ryan. Every muscle in Evelyn's body tensed. What about him? Frank looked from her to me, then spoke the words that changed everything. The old hunting cabin. He pointed toward the western hills. It's on fire. At almost the exact same moment, a deputy's voice crackled over Sheriff Lawson's radio. Structure fire fully involved. Then another voice shouted in the background. Sheriff! We've got a vehicle leaving the scene. Tom grabbed the microphone. Can anyone identify the driver? There was a long pause. Then came the reply. Negative. Another pause. Whoever it is. The deputy's voice grew urgent. They just threw something out of the driver's window. No one knew it yet. But lying beside that lonely ranch road was a scorched metal lockbox. And inside it was the one document Ryan had spent 23 years trying to keep hidden. If you're enjoying this story, thank you for staying with us. Your likes, comments, and subscriptions help this channel continue bringing you stories about family, courage, forgiveness, and second chances. Fire has a way of making everything feel urgent. By the time we reached the old hunting cabin, flames were already punching through the roof. Volunteer firefighters worked from both sides of the clearing. Smoke rolled into the evening sky like a thunderstorm. The cabin had belonged to Richard Carter's father. It wasn't fancy. Just 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, a porch overlooking a small fishing pond. Ryan and Derek had spent nearly every hunting season there growing up. Now, it was disappearing one beam at a time. Sheriff Tom Lawson spotted us as we pulled in. "Stay back." Evelyn ignored him. "My family's memories are burning." Tom gently caught her arm. "And I'd rather not have you burn with them." She finally stopped. Her eyes never left the cabin. "I don't understand." "Neither did I. If someone wanted to destroy evidence, why set the entire building on fire? A fire attracts attention. A thief usually prefers silence. Unless the fire wasn't the real objective." Tom walked over carrying a black evidence bag, the lockbox. Inside sat a scorched metal box about the size of a shoebox. Its paint had blistered. One hinge had melted. The combination dial had cracked from the heat. "This is what they threw from the truck." Tom nodded. "A deputy found it about half a mile down the road. Can you open it?" "We're going to try." The county locksmith arrived less than 30 minutes later. He placed the box on the tailgate of his truck. "This won't be pretty." "It doesn't have to be." After several minutes of drilling, the lock finally gave way. Everyone leaned closer. Inside, there weren't stacks of papers, only 3 items: a cassette tape, a brass key, and a sealed envelope. Across the front someone had written "Tobe opined only no name, no date. Tom carefully opened it. The letter inside had survived. The handwriting immediately caught Evelyn's attention. Richard. She knew it before anyone else. Tom began reading silently. Halfway through, his expression changed. Linda Foster stepped beside him. "What?" Without answering, Tom handed her the letter. Linda read every word, then looked directly at Evelyn. "You need to read this." Evelyn unfolded the pages with trembling hands. The first line was simple. "If you're reading this, something has gone terribly wrong," she continued. "If I've failed to convince you, please forgive me. Nothing that happened was your fault." Neither of us spoke. Neither of us breathed. Then Evelyn reached the final page. The letter slipped from her fingers. "What is it?" She couldn't answer. Tom picked up the pages. He read the final paragraph aloud. "If anyone ever blames my family, tell them I made the decision. Ryan never knew." The clearing fell completely silent. "Ryan never knew." The sentence echoed inside my head. Tom read it again, slower this time. "Ryan never knew." Linda looked toward Evelyn. "This changes things. It changes everything." Evelyn stared into the fire consuming the cabin. "My husband," she whispered, "was protecting our son." Tom folded the letter carefully. "Or trying to." "But from what?" "To no one," answered, "because none of us knew." The cassette tape bothered me more than the letter. I held it up. Plain grey plastic. No label, no date, nothing. Tom noticed. "We'll need equipment." "I still have one." Everyone looked at me. "I never threw away my old tape recorder." Frank Wilson laughed. "I knew military guys never throw anything away. I learned that from my father." We drove straight back to the ranch. Richard's old workshop still had electricity. After a little searching, I found my old portable cassette recorder stored inside a cabinet. Dust covered it, but fresh batteries brought it back to life. Everyone gathered around the workbench. Tom slid the tape inside. Nobody spoke. The motor clicked. Static. Several long seconds of silence. Then, a man's voice. Older. Calm. Charles Benton. At least, that's who we believed it was. "If someone is listening." The tape crackled. Then Richard was right. Evelyn covered her mouth. Charles continued. "Why argued?" "More than once. But Richard Carter is not the man people think." The tape hissed. "He tried to stop me." Tom looked up sharply. "Stop him from what?" The recording continued. "I made the mistake. My pride. My temper. My decision." Another burst of static. "Then, I borrowed money from." The tape suddenly warped. The next several seconds became unintelligible. Only broken sounds. Fragments. Bridge. Truck. River. Nothing. Clear. Then Charles spoke again. "If I don't survive." Everyone leaned closer. "Tell Evelyn." The tape clicked. Stopped. Silence. The ribbon had snapped. "No." Evelyn whispered. "No." I carefully removed the cassette. The tape itself had broken from age, not fire. Tom looked disappointed. "Can it be repaired?" "I think so." I remembered an old electronics shop in town. The owner repaired vintage radios. If anyone can save it, I said, it's Harold Simmons. Tom nodded. We'll take it first thing tomorrow. The mood inside the workshop shifted. The letter had cleared Ryan of one thing, at least according to Richard. Ryan hadn't known whatever decision Richard had made, but it created an even larger mystery. If Ryan was innocent 23 years ago, why spend the last 23 years hiding evidence? Linda asked the question aloud. If Ryan didn't know, why protect the secret? Nobody had an answer. Except maybe Derek. Just after midnight, there was a knock at the ranch house door. I opened it. Derek stood outside. He looked terrified. What happened? He stepped inside quickly. I remembered something. Evelyn immediately stood. What? He rubbed both hands together. I was 14. It was the summer Charles disappeared. Everyone waited. I woke up one night. I heard Dad and Ryan arguing. Ryan, I frowned. Ryan would have been 20. Derek nodded. He had just come home from college. What were they arguing about? I couldn't hear everything. He closed his eyes, trying to remember. But I remember Dad saying one sentence. What sentence? Derek took a slow breath. He said, "No one can ever know what your mother did." The room froze. Evelyn stared at her son. I did. Derek looked heartbroken. I don't think he meant it the way it sounds. But those were his exact words. Before anyone could respond, the ranch telephone rang. Tom answered immediately. His face changed after only a few seconds. What? He listened. Are you sure? Another pause. I'll be there. He slowly hung up. What happened? Tom looked around the room. They found human remains. Every heartbeat seemed to stop. Where? Tom swallowed. Under the floor. He looked toward the dark silhouette of the burned hunting cabin outside the window. Exactly where the fire started. Nobody moved. For several long seconds. The only sound inside the ranch house was the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Sheriff Tom Lawson finally broke the silence. They're not identifying anyone tonight. Evelyn slowly sat back down. Charles. Tom shook his head. We don't know. The fire exposed a section of the crawl space. One of the firefighters noticed bone. Frank Wilson quietly removed his hat. Oh Lord. Tom looked at all of us. I'm asking everyone to stay away from the cabin. Until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Nobody argued. 2. Sleep was impossible. Just before dawn, I walked out of the porch with a cup of coffee. The ranch looked peaceful. Morning mist drifted across the pastures. A few horses wandered toward the creek. If someone had driven by, they would have thought nothing had changed. They would have been wrong behind that peaceful landscape. A family was coming apart. By 8 o'clock. The state forensic team had arrived. They sealed off nearly 50 yards around the burned cabin. Ground-penetrating radar, evidence tents, photography equipment, everything was methodical. Sheriff Lawson met me near the tape. They found more. What? There isn't one set of remains. My stomach tightened. How many? At least 2. I stared at him. You're sure? They've uncovered 2 separate burial sites. Evelyn, who had just walked up beside us, closed her eyes. Oh, Richard. Tom immediately shook his head. Please don't jump to conclusions. We don't know who these people are. We don't know when they died. We don't even know if they're connected. But everyone standing there thought the same thing. Charles Benton. And someone else. News helicopters began arriving before noon. By lunchtime, national media had picked up the story. Human remains found on wealthy Texas ranch. 23-year mystery deepens. Marriage dispute now overshadowed by criminal investigation. The Carter Ranch became the biggest story in the state. Reporters lined the front entrance. Satellite trucks filled the roadside. Deputies turned everyone away. Even so, people watched from every hill they could find. Inside the ranch house, Linda Foster spread several legal documents across the dining room table. Everything changes now? How? I asked. The inheritance case becomes secondary. She looked toward Evelyn. If these remains are connected to Charles Benton. She paused. Every financial transaction from that time will be examined. Evelyn nodded. I expected that. They'll review every land purchase, every bank record, every business decision. I know. Linda leaned forward. I need to ask something difficult. Evelyn met her eyes. Ask. Did Richard ever seem frightened during those years? She thought for a long time. Then, yes. Everyone looked at her. When? The summer Charles disappeared. What happened? He stopped sleeping. He started locking every door. Had checked the windows 3 or 4 times every night. She frowned. I assumed he was worried about cattle thieves. Linda quietly wrote the note down. What else? He carried a pistol. All the time. The Frank looked surprised. Richard hated guns. I know. He said they complicated problems. Evelyn nodded. Exactly. But for nearly 6 months. She looked toward the burned cabin. He never went anywhere without one. Shortly after noon, Derek arrived again. This time, he wasn't alone. His wife Melissa walked beside him. She carried an old cardboard box. I found these in our attic. She placed the box on the table. What are they? Ryan's college things. Derek looked embarrassed. He stored them at our house years ago. Melissa removed several notebooks, old textbooks, hunting magazines, receipts, nothing unusual. Then, a leather-bound journal. Ryan, Carter, 1999. Derek frowned. I've never seen that. Melissa opened it carefully. Most entries were ordinary. Classes, football games, weekend trips home. Then one page had been torn out. Not neatly, violently. The next page began in the middle of a sentence. Dad says nobody can ever know. Linda looked up immediately. What? Melissa handed her the journal. The incomplete entry continued. Mom would never survive it. Charles refuses to listen. Everything depends on tomorrow. Then it ended. The following pages were blank. Ryan had never written in it again. To nobody spoke. Finally, Derek whispered, I don't remember any of this. Evelyn looked heartbroken. Neither do I. I studied the torn edge. Someone removed that page recently. Linda nodded. I think you're right. Why? The paper isn't aged the same way. Tom, who had just walked in, overheard us. He carefully examined the binding. I agree. The missing page wasn't torn out 23 years ago. It was removed much later. How much later? He shrugged. Could have been last week. Everyone looked toward the front window. Ryan. Again. Turtee, as if someone had spoken his name aloud, a black SUV turned into the driveway. Ryan climbed out, alone. Deputies immediately stepped toward him. I need to speak to my mother. Sheriff Lawson folded his arms. About what? My father. Tom didn't move. You've had plenty of opportunities. Ryan looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes. His suit wrinkled. For the first time, he didn't look like a man in control. He looked like a son carrying something too heavy. Evelyn stepped onto the porch. What do you want? Ryan looked at her. Really looked at her. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. Finally. I didn't know. She frowned. Didn't know what? About the bodies. I swear. She searched his face. Ryan. His eyes filled with tears. I thought Dad buried papers. Not people. Silence. Then Evelyn asked the question only a mother could ask. Have you lied to me? Ryan nodded. Yes. Many times. Yes. Did you love me while you were lying? Ryan broke. He covered his face with both hands. I've loved you every single day. Evelyn began crying too. Then why? He slowly lowered his hands. Because Dad made me promise. What promise? Ryan looked toward the burned hunting cabin. He said. His voice shook. If I ever told anyone the truth. He paused. It would destroy you. Before Evelyn could answer, a state investigator came running from the crime scene. Sheriff. Tom turned. What is it? The investigator was breathing hard. We've identified one of the remains. Tom's expression hardened. Ooh. The investigator looked from Tom to Evelyn, then quietly said, It isn't Charles Benton. Every person on the porch froze. Then who is it? The investigator opened a small evidence bag. Inside was a military dog tag. He handed it to me. I looked down. The name stamped into the metal made my blood run cold. It wasn't Richard Carter. It wasn't Charles Benton. It was someone I had served beside. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer, a man everyone believed had died overseas 24 years earlier. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The dog tag rested in my hand. Cold, cold, heavy, impossible. Staff Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Service number XLUC. Blood type. Correct. Religion Protestant. Every detail matched. Frank Wilson leaned closer. His face turned pale. Michael? I know. No. He shook his head. I was at Daniel's memorial. So was I. The state investigator looked between us. You knew him. I swallowed. I served with him. The investigator frowned. Personally. For almost 6 years. Tom Lawson looked at me. You never mentioned him. There was never a reason. I turned the tag over in my hand. The metal was badly worn. But one small scratch across the back stopped me cold. I knew that scratch. Daniel had carved it himself with a pocket knife after losing a poker game during a deployment. He'd laughed about it for weeks. Nobody else would have known that. This is his. There wasn't the slightest doubt in my mind. The investigator cleared his throat. We're not saying these are Daniel Mercer's remains. I looked up. The tag was found beside the remains. Exactly. It could have belonged to someone else. It could have. But how? Nobody answered. Because none of us had one. Evelyn stepped beside me. You look like you've seen a ghost. In a way. I stared at the tag again. Maybe I have. She gently touched my arm. Tell me about him. I looked toward the hills beyond the ranch. Daniel Mercer. Always first to volunteer. Always the loudest laugh in the room. The kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday but forgot where he left his boots. He saved my life once. Everyone turned toward me. It was overseas. Our convoy hit an ambush. I never saw the second explosion. But Daniel did. I paused. He pulled me behind an armored vehicle. What happened to him? He caught part of the blast instead. Frank quietly nodded. He carried scars after that. I smiled sadly. He used to joke they made him look tougher. Tom folded his arms, according to military records. He looked down at his notebook. Daniel Mercer died 24 years ago. He was listed as killed during a vehicle accident. Yes, I frowned. It wasn't an accident. Tom looked surprised. What? It happened during a classified transport mission. I couldn't discuss it back then. Can you now? I honestly don't know. He nodded slowly. Fair enough. Oh, one thing doesn't make sense. What? If Daniel died overseas? I looked toward the burned cabin. How did his dog tag end up buried beneath a hunting cabin in Texas? By afternoon, military investigators had arrived. 2 officers in dress uniforms stepped onto the ranch. Major Rebecca Collins introduced herself. We appreciate your cooperation. Tom nodded. The remains are yours, she answered carefully. The dog tag is military property. The remains. She glanced toward the excavation site. Remain under joint jurisdiction until identification is complete. She turned toward me. Mr. Hayes. Major, you served with Staff Sergeant Mercer. I did. She handed me an old photograph. Can you identify him? The picture had been taken nearly 30 years earlier. A younger Daniel stood with 4 other soldiers. I pointed immediately. That's him. She nodded. Thank you. Then she surprised everyone. We have another question. What? Did Daniel ever mention Texas? I thought for a long time. Then, once, the major looked interested. When? A few months before he died. What did he say? I closed my eyes, searching my memory. He said he needed to visit someone after retirement. Ooh. He never told me. Did he mention why? I remembered something. Barely, he said. I frowned. He owed someone a debt. Inside the ranch house. Linda Foster spread every document we'd collected across the dining table. The room looked more like an investigation headquarters than a family home. Richard's ledger, Charles Benton's receipt, the unsigned land agreement, Ryan's journal, the broken cassette tape, the letter from Richard. Everything. Linda stood quietly studying the timeline. Then she circled one date. 23 years ago. What about it? Everything happened within 6 weeks. Charles disappeared. The mysterious loan. Ryan's journal entries. Richard's sleepless nights. The hidden lockbox. She tapped the table. These aren't separate mysteries. They're one. Frank nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. Linda looked toward me. And now? She pointed at Daniel's dog tag. Somehow your past has become part of it. While Ryan arrived just before sunset, no lawyers, no reporters, only Ryan. Sheriff Lawson met him halfway up the driveway. What now? Ryan looked exhausted. I heard about the dog tag. Tom didn't answer. Ryan looked directly at me. I know that name. Every head turned. You do? Ryan nodded slowly. My father mentioned Daniel Mercer. My heart skipped. When? The night before he died. Silence. What exactly did he say? Ryan looked down. He said. His voice cracked. I prayed Daniel would never come back to Texas. Frank stared at him. What does that mean? Ryan shook his head. I don't know. I asked him. He wouldn't explain instead. Ryan reached into his jacket. I brought something. He handed Tom a folded piece of paper. It was inside Dad's Bible. Evelyn looked confused. Richard kept notes in his Bible. Apparently. Tom carefully unfolded the page. It wasn't a note. It was a map. Hand-drawn. Simple. The Carter Ranch. One location had been circled in red. Not Marker 7, not the hunting cabin. Something else. Written beside the circle were 5 words. Old Willow Cemetery, Plot 18. Sessence. Darkness had already settled over the ranch when Tom looked up. The cemetery is only 15 minutes away. Linda checked her watch. It'll have to wait until morning. Tom slowly shook his head. I don't think so. Why? He pointed toward the window. Outside. A pair of headlights raced away from the ranch entrance. One of the deputies grabbed his radio. Sheriff! What is it? The cemetery caretaker just called. Tom's expression changed instantly. Why? The deputy lowered the radio. Because someone broke into Plot 18. He swallowed hard. Less than 10 minutes ago. And whoever had been digging had left the grave open. By the time we reached Old Willow Cemetery, the sheriff's deputies had already sealed off the entrance. Red and blue lights flashed silently across rows of weathered headstones. The cemetery itself was more than 100 years old. Oak trees shaded most of the graves. Generations of ranching families rested there. The caretaker, Walter Green, stood near the gate wringing his cap in both hands. He looked shaken. I've never seen anything like it. Sheriff Tom Lawson stepped out of his cruiser. When did you find it? About 20 minutes ago. What happened? Walter pointed toward the northern corner. I came to lock the gates. And I saw fresh tire tracks. He swallowed. Then I saw the dirt. Plot 18 wasn't marked by a grand monument, only a simple gray headstone. The name carved into it read W.H. Carter 1999-1998 Richard Carter's mother. Evelyn stopped walking. My mother-in-law. Tom looked down at the disturbed earth. Someone had dug carefully. Professionally. The grave wasn't destroyed, just opened. The coffin was gone. Nobody spoke. Walter finally whispered, "It was there last month." Tom turned sharply. "You're certain?" "I mow this cemetery every week." "I would have noticed." The sheriff slowly removed his hat. Someone stole an entire coffin. The realization settled over us like cold rain. Not jewelry, not flowers, not a headstone, a coffin. Linda Foster broke the silence. "Why?" Tom answered honestly. "I don't know." Frank Wilson looked toward the open grave. "Unless..." He stopped. "What?" Frank rubbed his jaw. "They weren't after Ruth." Everyone looked at him. "They were after something buried with her." The 2 crime scene investigators immediately began documenting everything. Fresh shovel marks, boot prints, deep tire tracks leading toward the back service road. One investigator walked over holding something in a plastic evidence bag. "Sheriff." Tom turned. "What did you find? A glove?" "Brown. Worn." Tom carefully examined it. Inside the wristband, 3 stitched initials. RC. My first thought was obvious. Ryan Carter. Tom had the same thought. So did Evelyn. But Derek quietly shook his head. "That isn't Ryan's." We all looked at him. "What?" "My father." He pointed toward the glove. "Richard had those initials too." Silence. To the cemetery caretaker led us into the small records office. Dusty books lined the shelves. Burial permits, church records, maps. Walter opened a ledger. "Here, He pointed to Ruth Carter's burial. Everything looked ordinary, until Tom reached the final column. What is this? Walter leaned closer. Huh. What? That shouldn't be there. Tom turned the book toward us. Under special instructions, someone had written private fate family burial, no vault inspection. Linda frowned. What does that mean? Walter shrugged. Normally, before a burial, the cemetery verifies the burial vault. So, this one was exempt. Who authorized it? Walter traced the signature, then looked up. Oh. What? It wasn't Richard. Ooh. Walter swallowed. It was Judge Helen Brooks. Less than an hour later, Helen arrived at the cemetery. She looked genuinely confused. I haven't seen that ledger in years. Tom showed her the signature. Is this yours? She adjusted her glasses, then nodded. Yes. Why did you authorize it? Helen looked toward Ruth Carter's empty grave. I didn't. Tom frowned. Your signature is right here. I know. But I never authorized skipping a vault inspection. She looked closer. My signature is real. The handwriting beside it isn't. Linda stepped beside her. Can someone have added those instructions later? Helen nodded immediately. Very easily. The signature would have already been in the book. Someone simply wrote beneath it. Tom looked thoughtful. So whoever did this had access to cemetery records. Back at the ranch, the tension only grew worse. Military investigators had remained behind examining Daniel Mercer's dog tag. Major Rebecca Collins walked into the living room carrying a slim folder. We found something. What? The serial number. I frowned. What about it? It doesn't match. I stared at her. What? The tag belongs to Daniel Mercer? Yes. But she laid the paperwork on the table. It was reissued. Frank blinked. Reissued. She nodded. The Army issued Daniel a replacement set 6 months before his reported death. I felt my pulse quicken. So these. I looked at the tag in the evidence bag. Weren't the tags he was wearing when he died? Correct. Meaning. Major Collins chose her words carefully. These were an older set. She looked directly at me. Daniel shouldn't have had them anymore. Pay to you that evening. Derek stayed behind after everyone else left. He wandered into Richard's old study. Quietly, almost absent-mindedly, I found him standing in front of a bookshelf. What are you looking at? I don't know. He frowned. I just remembered something. What? When we were kids. He pointed toward the shelves. Dad never let us touch these books. Sue. There was one book he checked every Sunday. I looked where he was pointing. A massive leather Bible. The same one Ryan had found the map inside. Derek pulled it from the shelf. It feels heavier. I took it from him. He was right, much heavier. I slowly turned it upside down. Nothing happened. Then, I noticed the pages. They'd been cut. Not all of them. Just the center. Someone had hollowed out the Bible decades earlier. Inside the hidden compartment lay a small brass key. Evelyn gasped. There were 2. Everyone looked at her. What do you mean? She pointed toward the key Tom had recovered from the lockbox. They match. Tom placed both keys side by side. Identical old brass, same manufacturer, same worn edges. Only one difference. Tiny engraved numbers. One read 17. The other, 18. Frank frowned. 2 keys. To what? Nobody knew. Until Walter Green, the cemetery caretaker, quietly spoke from the doorway. I've seen keys like those. Every head turned. Where? Walter looked at the 2 keys, then slowly answered. The old safety deposit boxes. Tom frowned. At the bank. Walter shook his head. No. At the railroad station. Silence. The station closed almost 30 years ago. Walter nodded. It did. But nobody ever emptied the lockers beneath it. He looked directly at Tom. If those keys still work. He paused. Whatever Richard was hiding may have been waiting there all along. The old railroad station had been abandoned for nearly 3 decades. Most people in town barely noticed it anymore. They drove past the boarded up windows, past the faded sign hanging crooked above the entrance, past the cracked brick walls that had once welcomed thousands of travelers. To everyone else, it was just another forgotten building. To us, it had suddenly become the center of everything. Sheriff Tom Lawson looked at his watch. Nobody goes inside until daylight. Frank Wilson frowned. If somebody else knows about those lockers. Tom nodded. I've already posted 2 deputies outside. They'll stay there all night. No one goes in. No one argued. It was the first sensible thing that had happened all week. I didn't sleep much. Again. Around 4 in the morning, I wandered onto the front porch. The ranch was silent. Only the distant sound of crickets filled the darkness. A few minutes later, Evelyn joined me carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You never could stay in bed. I smiled. I've tried. She handed me a mug. For what it's worth. She looked out across the pasture. This isn't exactly how I imagined our honeymoon. No. I pictured fishing. She laughed. And I pictured teaching you how to ride one of my stubborn horses. I would have lost that battle. You definitely would have. For a little while. We simply watched the sunrise. It reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her. Not because she owned thousands of acres. Because she could still find peace. Even when life gave her every reason not to. At exactly 8 o'clock, Sheriff Lawson unlocked the front doors of the old railroad station. Dust drifted through the morning light. Broken benches still lined the waiting room. An ancient ticket window sat behind cracked glass. The station clock had stopped years ago. 8:17. No one had bothered winding it since. Walter Green led us toward a narrow hallway beneath the main platform. There, he pointed. A wall of steel lockers. 48 in all. Most had rusted shut. Some doors hung open. Others had been pried apart decades earlier. Near the bottom row, 2 lockers remained untouched. Numbers 17 and 18. Tom carefully held up the brass keys. They fit. Ready. Everyone nodded. He inserted the first key. It turned smoothly, as though someone had used it yesterday. The lock clicked. Tom slowly opened locker 17. Inside. Nothing. Just dust, cobwebs, and an old folded newspaper from 24 years earlier. Frank frowned. Empty. Tom reached inside anyway. He felt around every corner. Nothing. Linda sighed. So much for that. But I wasn't convinced. I picked up the newspaper. It crumbled slightly in my hands. There was nothing unusual about the front page. Until I folded it open. A classified advertisement had been circled in red ink. Only 5 words. Lo canacid nambi ejikchin. Nobody said a word. Tom looked at me. You want the honors? I shook my head. It's your investigation. He inserted the second key. This lock resisted. Then, slowly, it turned. The metal door creaked open. Inside sat a single canvas bank bag, the kind banks used before armored trucks became common. It was sealed with wax. Across the front, Richard Carter's handwriting. If Evelyn is with you. Tom carefully broke the seal. Inside the bag, 3 cassette tapes, a thick envelope, a property deed, and a small leather journal. Evelyn stared at the handwriting. I bought him that journal. She whispered, for our 10th anniversary. Linda opened the envelope first. Inside was another letter, this one addressed only to Evelyn. She looked at me. I don't know if I can. I gently squeezed her hand. You don't have to? She shook her head. I do. She unfolded the pages. My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then I have failed. I prayed every day that these papers would never be needed. Not because they protect me, but because they protect you. You once told me that the greatest burden a husband carries is the pain he cannot prevent. I finally understand what you meant. If I could trade places with you, I would. Everything that happened began with one terrible mistake. It wasn't yours, it wasn't Ryan's. And it wasn't Charles, it was mine. I believed I could solve a problem alone. Instead, I created one that lasted a generation. Please forgive me. Not for what people believe. For what I never found the courage to tell you. Richard. Tears quietly rolled down Evelyn's face. He knew. She whispered. He carried this all those years. Tom picked up the leather journal. Unlike the notebook we'd already found, this one was detailed. Every page dated, every entry carefully written. The first several months described ordinary ranch life, weather, cattle prices, fence repairs. Then, the entries changed. The date matched the week Charles Benton disappeared. Richard wrote Charles came today. He finally admitted the loan wasn't for Evelyn. It was for Ryan. The room went completely still. Tom looked up sharply. What? Linda took the journal, read the page herself, then continued aloud. Ryan never asked Charles for the money. I did. Our son had accumulated gambling debts during college. Far more than I realized. Charles agreed to help because he cared about our family. I promised him I would repay every dollar within 6 months. Evelyn gasped. Gambling. Derek slowly sank into a chair. No. Tom kept reading. I deposited the money into Evelyn's account to hide it from her. Then immediately withdrew it using papers she had unknowingly signed with other business documents. It was the only way I believed I could protect our son from public disgrace. I hated myself the moment I did it. Silence. Every piece suddenly began fitting together. The forged signature. The mysterious loan. The missing money. Richard hadn't stolen from Charles. He had deceived his own wife. To save his son. To Derek covered his face. Ryan. He whispered. You were in trouble. No one answered. Because the journal already had. Tom turned another page. My greatest fear is not that Evelyn learns what I did. It is that Ryan believes he owes me for it. He must never spend his life protecting my lie. If I fail to tell him before I die. Whoever finds this journal, please tell my son. He has already paid enough. Evelyn quietly closed her eyes. My poor boy. I looked at her in surprise. She wasn't angry. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about Ryan, a mother, until the very end. Just then, one of the deputies came running down the hallway. Sheriff! Tom looked up. What happened? The deputy was out of breath. We've got a problem. What kind of problem? The forensic lab called. Tom's expression changed instantly. The remains. The deputy nodded. They've identified the second body. No one spoke. Tom took a slow breath. Who is it? The deputy swallowed. It isn't Charles Benton. It isn't Daniel Mercer. He looked directly at Evelyn. It's Richard Carter. The world seemed to stop. Richard Carter. The man everyone believed had died peacefully in a hospital 4 years earlier. Had apparently been buried beneath the hunting cabin. For more than 20 years. No one spoke. Not Tom. Not Linda. Not Frank. Not Derek. Even the old railroad station seemed to fall silent. Richard Carter, buried beneath the hunting cabin. For more than 20 years. It couldn't be true. It simply couldn't. Evelyn slowly lowered herself into a nearby chair. I buried my husband. Her voice barely carried across the room. I stood beside his coffin. I watched them lower him into the ground. She looked at Sheriff Lawson. I visit his grave every Christmas. Tom knelt beside her. I know. So explain this? I wish I could. Linda took the forensic report from the deputy. She read every page carefully. Then she looked up. The remains beneath the cabin were identified through old surgical hardware. What kind? 18 years before Richard supposedly died, he shattered his right hip after being thrown from a horse. Evelyn nodded immediately. I remember. They implanted a titanium plate. Linda tapped the report. The serial number on that implant matches Richard Carter. Frank shook his head. Then who? He couldn't finish the sentence. Because everyone was thinking the same thing. If Richard had died beneath the cabin, who had been buried 4 years ago? Within an hour, the sheriff obtained an emergency court order. Richard Carter's grave was opened. The cemetery was closed to the public. Only investigators, the medical examiner, and immediate family were allowed inside. Evelyn insisted on coming. I owe him that. The sun was beginning to set as the workers carefully lifted the vault. No one said a word. The lid was removed. The coffin opened. Inside lay human remains. But before the medical examiner even began his examination, he frowned. That's strange. Tom looked over. What? The skeleton is too small. Evelyn closed her eyes. Richard had been 6'3", broad shoulders, powerfully built. The body inside the coffin wasn't. The examiner continued. The age is wrong. The bone structure is wrong. And he paused. This individual was never fitted with a titanium hip. Silence spread across the cemetery. Tom slowly removed his hat. So. The examiner looked directly at him. This is not Richard Carter. News of the exhumation leaked within an hour. By midnight, television crews had gathered outside the cemetery gates. Every network wanted answers. Nobody had any. The Carter family mystery had become national news. Ryan was arrested just after 10 that evening. Not for murder. Not yet. For obstruction of justice. Destroying evidence. Providing false statements during an active investigation. He didn't resist. He simply held out his hands. As the deputy placed handcuffs around his wrists, Ryan looked at Tom. I want one phone call. You'll get it. I don't want my lawyer. Tom frowned. Then who? My mother. Evelyn answered on the second ring. Ryan. His voice broke almost immediately. Momzo, she closed her eyes. I'm here. They arrested me? I know. I didn't kill Dad. I know. There was a long silence. Then Ryan whispered something that surprised every deputy standing nearby. I've been trying to find him for 23 years. Evelyn frowned. What? I believed he disappeared. She looked at Tom in confusion. What are you talking about? Ryan took a shaky breath. Dade came to my apartment the night before Charles disappeared. He told me he was leaving for a few days. Said he needed to fix something. Never came back. Evelyn gripped the phone tighter. But, her voice trembled, I lived with him for another 19 years. Ryan quietly answered. No, you lived with someone pretending to be him. Every person listening froze. The room inside the sheriff's office fell silent. Even Tom looked stunned. Ryan, Evelyn whispered, think very carefully. I am. The man after that night. He looked like Dad. Sounded like Dad. What? Wasn't exactly the same. Different how? He stopped drinking coffee. He suddenly hated horses. He became left-handed. Evelyn stared into space. Memories began returning. Richard had always written with his right hand. About 15 years before his supposed death, he'd begun signing checks with his left. Doctors had blamed arthritis. She'd believed them. Ryan continued. I noticed too. But Dad told me he'd injured his shoulder. Tom slowly sat down. This, he whispered, is impossible. Major Rebecca Collins arrived shortly after midnight. She'd been reviewing military archives connected to Daniel Mercer. I have something. Tom looked up. Please tell me it's good. I don't know. She placed an old personnel file on the desk. Daniel Mercer requested emergency leave. When? 23 years ago. For what reason? She pointed to the request. To travel to Carter Ranch. Everyone looked at one another. Evelyn frowned. He never came here. Major Collins shook her head. We can't confirm that. What we can confirm, she turned another page, is that he disappeared for 4 days before reporting back to duty. I stared at her. Daniel never told me. He wasn't required to. The major met my eyes. But there's one more thing. What? He listed only one civilian contact. She handed me the form. The emergency contact wasn't Charles Benton. It wasn't Richard Carter. It wasn't Ryan. It was Evelyn Carter. She looked at the paper as if she'd never seen her own name before. I've never met Daniel Mercer. I believed her. So did everyone else. Which raised an even larger question. Why would Daniel list a woman he'd never met as the only person the army should contact in an emergency? Just before dawn, the state crime lab called again. Tom answered. He listened quietly, then slowly closed his notebook. What is it? Linda asked. Tom looked around the room. The DNA comparison is complete. On Richard. Tom nodded. And the remains beneath the hunting cabin are definitely Richard Carter. Evelyn covered her mouth. Tom continued. And the body buried in Richard Carter's grave. He paused. Has also been identified. Frank leaned forward. Who is it? Tom looked down at the report one last time. Then said the name that no one in the room expected. Charles Benton. The missing ranch hand had been buried for 4 years. Under Richard Carter's name. Nobody moved. Charles Benton. Buried under Richard Carter's name. The words refused to make sense. Sheriff Tom Lawson looked at the DNA report again. Then a third time. He was hoping he'd missed something. He hadn't. The lab is certain. Linda Foster leaned over his shoulder. How certain? 99.98%. She slowly nodded. That's as certain as we're going to get. Evelyn sat quietly. Her hands rested in her lap. She wasn't crying anymore. She looked exhausted. My husband disappeared 23 years ago. Tom nodded. Yes. I buried Charles 4 years ago, believing he was Richard. Yes. She looked up. Then who was the man living in my house? No one answered. Because no one knew. By sunrise, the investigation had become something entirely different. The inheritance dispute, the competency hearing, the ranch ownership battle, all of it had disappeared from the headlines. Every reporter wanted the answer to one question. Who had lived as Richard Carter for 19 years? Tom gathered everyone inside the ranch house. We're starting over. Frank frowned. What do you mean? We've been investigating this backwards. Linda nodded. He's right. Tom drew a timeline across a large sheet of paper. 23 years ago. Charles disappears. Richard disappears. Daniel Mercer comes to Texas. Unknown remains buried beneath the hunting cabin. Someone begins living as Richard Carter. 4 years ago. That same man dies in a hospital. Charles is buried as Richard. Tom looked around the room. We've been asking who killed Charles. He shook his head. Wrong question. We should have been asking, who became Richard? Ryan requested another interview. This time, without an attorney. Tom made him sign the appropriate forms, then switched on the recorder. State your name. Ryan Carter. Do you understand your rights? Yes. Tom leaned forward. Tell me everything. Ryan took a long breath. When I was 20, Dad asked me to help move someone. Tom didn't interrupt. It was late, very late. He drove us to the hunting cabin. What happened? He told me to wait outside. Ryan looked down at his hands. I heard arguing, voices. 3. Wuz? Dade? Charles? And another man? My heart skipped. What did the third voice sound like? Ryan frowned. I didn't recognize it. Then, there was a gunshot. Silence filled the room. Ryan closed his eyes. Dad came outside alone. He told me Charles had left. Did you believe him? No. Why not? Because Dad was covered in blood. Tom looked at Ryan carefully. Why didn't you tell anyone? Ryan laughed bitterly. I was 20 years old. I thought my father had killed someone. I was terrified. So what happened next? Ryan's voice softened. He made me promise. There it is again. Ryan nodded. He said, everything I do tonight is to save your mother. Tom exchanged a glance with Linda. The exact same words. Again, always protecting Evelyn, always protecting Evelyn, always protecting them. From what? While Ryan was being interviewed, Major Rebecca Collins continued searching old military archives. Just after noon, she walked into the sheriff's office carrying another folder. I found Daniel. Every head turned. What? Not physically. She laid several declassified reports onto the table. I wasn't transporting military equipment. I frowned. I thought that's what happened. So did everyone. She tapped one document. The files were classified until last year. Tom picked up the report. What was he transporting? Witnesses. Silence. Witnesses to what? A federal corruption investigation. Frank blinked. What does that have to do with Texas? Major Collins pointed toward one name. Witness number 3. Charles Benton. The room became perfectly still. I looked at the report. No. Major Collins nodded. Charles Benton wasn't just a ranch hand. He'd become a confidential federal witness. Against Richard. Carter to Evelyn stared at the page. That's impossible. Tom looked at her. Why? Because Charles loved Richard. They were practically brothers. Major Collins answered quietly. People cooperate with federal investigators for many reasons. Tom turned another page. What was Richard accused of? Major Collins frowned. That's the strange part. The allegations are completely blacked out. Still classified? Apparently. Linda looked thoughtful. So Daniel Mercer escorted Charles to Texas. Right before everyone disappeared. Major Collins nodded. That's what the records suggest. Too late that afternoon, one of the forensic anthropologists called Sheriff Lawson. I think we've made another mistake. Tom sighed. What now? The body beneath the hunting cabin. What about it? It wasn't buried 23 years ago. Tom straightened. What? The soil layers don't match. Then we estimate, the scientist paused, between 3 and 5 years ago. Everyone froze. Tom spoke slowly. You're telling me Richard wasn't buried beneath that cabin for 23 years? No. Hay was buried there only a few years ago. Tom looked around the room. Everything changed. Again. That meant Richard had not died 23 years ago. He had lived, somewhere, until only a few years before his supposed hospital death. Someone had killed him, hidden his body beneath the cabin, then placed Charles Benton into Richard's coffin. Linda whispered the conclusion before anyone else could. The impersonation didn't begin 23 years ago. She looked directly at Tom. It began only 4 years ago. Just before sunset, a deputy hurried into the office carrying a cardboard box. Sheriff, what is it? We've finished searching the old hunting cabin. Tom frowned. I thought we'd already processed everything. We found a hidden compartment. The deputy placed an old cassette recorder on the table. Unlike the broken tape from Richard's lockbox, this recorder still contained a cassette. Tom pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, Richard Carter's unmistakable voice. If you're hearing this to you, then I am already dead, not missing, not hiding, dead. Please don't blame my sons. They don't know. Ryan never knew. Derek never knew. Even Evelyn. He paused. Never knew the truth about the man who came to my ranch 23 years ago. Another voice suddenly interrupted the recording. Calm, deep, unfamiliar. Richard, they're almost here. Richard answered quietly. I know. The tape clicked and ended. Nobody said a word. The tape had lasted less than a minute, but it had destroyed months of assumptions. Richard Carter had expected to die. He hadn't sounded frightened. He'd sounded resigned. Sheriff Tom Lawson pressed the rewind button. The cassette whirred softly. Again. Richard's voice filled the room once more. If you're hearing this, then I am already dead, not missing, not hiding, dead. Please don't blame my sons. They don't know. Ryan never knew. Derek never knew. Even Evelyn never knew the truth about the man who came to my ranch 23 years ago. Then the second voice. Richard, they're almost here, I know. Click. Silence. Tom stopped the recorder. Can anyone identify that second voice? One by one, we all shook our heads. Until Frank Wilson frowned. I've heard him before. Everyone looked at Frank. You have? I think so. Where? Frank closed his eyes. It wasn't recently. It was years ago, maybe 20 years. Tom leaned forward. Take your time. Frank rubbed his forehead. I used to deliver cattle to a federal livestock auction outside Dallas. There was a man there. One. What man? I never knew his name. He wore a suit. Didn't look like a rancher. But he opened his eyes. That voice sounds exactly like his. Major Rebecca Collins immediately became interested. A federal livestock auction. Frank nodded. He was always talking to government people. FBI. I don't know. Marshals. I don't know. But everybody treated him like he mattered. Major Collins wrote several notes. Do you remember anything else? Frank thought. He always drove the same old green pickup. What else? He had a scar. Where? Across his left cheek. She circled something in her notebook. Tom noticed. You recognize that? Maybe. She didn't elaborate. Back at the ranch, Evelyn wandered alone through Richard's old study. The room looked exactly as he'd left it. Books, awards, family photographs, his favorite leather chair. She slowly picked up a framed picture from nearly 30 years earlier. Richard, Ryan, Derek, herself, Charles Benton. All smiling. All together. It looked like an ordinary family photograph. Until she noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. Standing far in the background, near one of the barns, was another man, almost hidden, only half his face visible. She carried the photograph downstairs. Michael, I looked up. What is it? She handed me the frame. Who's that? I studied the tiny figure, too small to identify, but something caught my attention. The man wore military boots, not cowboy boots, military issue. Major Collins stepped closer. May I? She carefully removed the photograph from its frame, then examined it beneath a magnifying lamp. Her expression slowly changed. What? She looked directly at me. Michael, the man in the background, she pointed, is wearing an Army Criminal Investigation Division jacket. I stared. CID. Military investigators. Daniel Mercer had never worked for CD. So why was one of their agents standing on Richard Carter's ranch? 2. Tom immediately requested the original negative from the local photography studio. An hour later, the owner arrived carrying an old envelope. I almost threw these away years ago. Inside was 6 negatives from that family gathering. The state crime lab scanned them into a computer. One image after another appeared on the monitor. Then, the final photograph, taken only seconds after the family portrait. Nobody had posed. People were simply talking, laughing, walking away. But in the corner of the frame, Daniel Mercer stood face to face with Richard Carter. Between them, the same unidentified man in the seed jacket. All 3 looked serious, not friendly, as though they were negotiating something. Tom quietly whispered, "So they did know each other." Ryan was brought from the county jail under guard. Tom placed the enlarged photograph in front of him. Ryan stared at it for nearly a minute. Then he pointed. "I know him." Tom's pulse quickened. "Which one?" "The man in the middle, the CID agent." Ryan nodded. "He wasn't military." Major Collins frowned. "What? He told us he was." Ryan looked directly at her. "But Dad later admitted he wasn't." "Then who was he?" Ryan swallowed. "Dad called him." He searched his memory. "Mr. Cross. First name?" "I never heard one." "Did he come here often?" Ryan nodded. "Several times." "What did he want?" Did he wow?" "But every time he visited." Ryan looked toward his mother. "Dad sent all of us into the house." Tom ordered an immediate search. Federal records, property records, driver's licenses, military databases, nothing. No CD agent named Cross, no federal investigator, no contractor, nothing. It was as if the man had never existed. Just after dusk, Walter Green called from the cemetery. "Sheriff, what is it? I found something." "Where?" "Inside the empty burial vault." Tom frowned. "We searched it, I know. But one of the bricks shifted." An hour later, Tom carefully removed a loose stone from inside Ruth Carter's burial vault. Behind it, a narrow metal tube. Inside the tube, a single sheet of folded paper. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakably Richard's. Not a letter, a list. Only 6 names: Charles Benton, Daniel Mercer, Richard Carter, Evelyn Carter, Ryan Carter, Derek Carter. Each name had a checkbox beside it. The first 3 were checked. The last 3 were blank. At the bottom, one sentence: "Fess, if Cross finds this list, we're already too late." The room fell silent. Frank slowly exhaled. So Cross wasn't protecting anyone. Tom looked at the list again. No, he was hunting them. Before anyone could respond, the sheriff's phone rang. He answered, listened, then slowly lowered it. His face had gone completely pale. Linda stepped closer. "Tom." He looked around the room. The crime lab finished restoring the damaged cassette from the lockbox. Everyone waited. Tom swallowed. They recovered the missing 12 seconds. "What does it say?" Tom didn't answer immediately. Finally, he spoke. "Charles Benton says." He looked directly at Evelyn. "Don't trust Cross." Then he looked at me. "And he says, Michael Hayes is the only man still alive who can finish what Daniel started." The room fell completely silent. No one looked at anyone else. Every pair of eyes settled on me. I wished they hadn't. Sheriff Tom Lawson replayed the restored recording one more time. Charles Benton's voice was weak, as though he knew he didn't have much time. "Don't trust Cross." A pause. Then, "Michael Hayes is the only man still alive who can finish what Daniel started." The tape ended. Tom switched off the recorder. "Michael." "I know." "No." He shook his head. "I don't think you do." I sat down slowly. "I've never heard Daniel mention a man named Cross." Major Rebecca Collins believed me. "I don't think Daniel would have." "Why?" "Need to know." She folded her hands on the table. Classified operations were compartmentalized. Even close friends weren't told everything. So Daniel could have been protecting me by keeping me in the dark. Exactly. Linda Foster stood beside the whiteboard where Tom had drawn the timeline. We've been missing one critical fact. She underlined Daniel Mercer's name. Daniel wasn't here by accident. She drew an arrow toward Charles Benton. He came because of Charles. Then another arrow toward Richard Carter. And somehow Richard became involved. Finally, she drew one last arrow. Toward me. And now the trail ends with Michael. Frank rubbed his chin. So the question isn't why Michael is involved. It's... He looked at me. What did Daniel leave behind? Major Collins opened another military file. There is one thing. What? Daniel signed for government property before leaving for Texas. Tom leaned forward. What kind of property? The file doesn't say. It only lists. She adjusted her glasses. One secured evidence package. Linda frowned. Evidence. Major Collins nodded. It was logged. It was never returned. So whatever Daniel brought to Texas disappeared. Ryan had been allowed to remain in the interview room. For the first time since all of this had begun, no one was treating him like the enemy. He looked tired, older, as if carrying 23 years of guilt had finally caught up with him. He looked at his mother. I'm sorry. Evelyn walked across the room. She stopped in front of him. I know. I should have told you everything. You were a frightened boy. I became a frightened man. She nodded sadly. Yes. Ryan lowered his head. I kept thinking if I could protect Dad's secret, everything would go back to normal. It never did. No. She reached out and held his hand. It does now. Ryan looked up. How can you forgive me? She smiled through her tears. Because your father spent 23 years trying to protect his family. She gently squeezed his hand. I'm not going to lose my son too. Derek quietly wiped his eyes. For the first time in years, the brothers looked at one another. Not as rivals. As family. 'Twere just afternoon. A deputy hurried inside carrying a small cardboard box. This was found in Richard's hospital records. Tom frowned. I thought we'd already collected everything. So did the hospital. They were renovating an old storage room. The box had fallen behind a filing cabinet. Across the top hit. Written in fading marker. PTSALEFCs. Richard Carter. Date admitted. 4 years earlier. Tom carefully opened it. Inside, a wallet, reading glasses, a wristwatch, and an unopened envelope. Addressed simply as for Michael Hayes. I stared at it. I never visited Richard in the hospital. Tom looked just as confused. Neither did anyone else. Linda examined the envelope. The papers aged consistently. It hasn't been tampered with. Tom handed it to me. It's yours. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, one handwritten page. Michael, if this reaches you, then Daniel chose correctly. You won't remember our meeting. We spoke only once. For less than 5 minutes. You were loading supplies before deployment. You apologized because you accidentally knocked over my coffee. You thought I was just another visitor. I wasn't. Daniel trusted your character long before he trusted your experience. That's why he chose you. Not because you were the strongest soldier. Because you never abandon people. If I fail, finish it. The truth is no longer mine to protect. Richard Carter. I read the letter again. I don't remember him. Major Collins nodded. I believe him. Why? People rarely remember ordinary moments. But extraordinary moments scurry. She looked toward Daniel's file. Change history. You, Sheriff. Lawson's phone rang. He answered immediately. This is Lawson. His expression hardened. When? Are you certain? He thanked the caller and ended the call. We've identified Cross. Everyone stood. You have? Tom nodded slowly. Not completely. But we found the name. He looked at Major Collins. It wasn't Cross. What was it? Elias. She took a slow breath. I was afraid of that. Tom continued. The man calling himself Cross was actually former FBI Special Agent Nathan Croswell. Linda frowned. I've heard that name. Tom nodded. He disappeared 22 years ago. Frank looked confused. So he's dead. Tom slowly shook his head. Officially, he's listed as missing. Major Collins quietly added, which means he could still be alive. He could, before anyone could absorb that news. One of the deputies burst through the front door. Sheriff. Tom turned. What happened? The security cameras. What about them? The cameras we installed at the burned hunting cabin. Tom's face tightened. Yes! They caught someone. Who? We don't know. The deputy placed a tablet on the table. A hooded figure had entered the cabin ruins less than 10 minutes earlier. The person walked directly to the exact spot where Richard's body had been found. They knelt, dug into the loose soil with bare hands, recovered something wrapped in black plastic, then looked directly into the camera. For just a second, the hood slipped back. An older man, grey hair, a deep scar running across his left cheek. Frank Wilson went pale. That's him. Tom looked up sharply. Who? Frank pointed at the frozen image. The man from the livestock auction. Major Collins didn't take her eyes off the screen. Nathan Croswell. The hooded man gave a faint smile toward the camera, as if he knew they were watching. Then he disappeared into the darkness. Nobody moved. The image remained frozen on the screen. An older man, grey hair, a scar running across his left cheek, and a smile that sent a chill through everyone in the room. Sheriff Tom Lawson looked at the timestamp. 10 minutes ago, Major Rebecca Collins was already reaching for her phone. I'm notifying every federal agency involved, Tom nodded, and every deputy in the county. Within minutes, roadblocks were being established. Patrol cars spread across every highway leading away from Ravenwood. Helicopters searched the ranch. State police joined the hunt. But deep down, I had a feeling. Cross hadn't spent more than 20 years hiding because he made careless mistakes. If he wanted to disappear, he would, unless he chose not to. Late that afternoon, a deputy hurried into the operations room. Sheriff. Tom looked up. What is it? We found something. Where? At the hunting cabin. I thought we'd searched every inch. So did we. The deputy laid a small satellite phone on the table. It was sitting on top of the ashes. Tom frowned. It wasn't buried. No. It was left there. For us. Major Collins carefully examined it. It still powered on. Almost as if waiting. The phone rang. No one reached for it. It rang again. Tom finally answered. This is Sheriff Lawson. A calm voice replied. I know. Tom's expression hardened. Nathan Croswell. The voice chuckled softly. So that's the name you've settled on. Where are you? A long way from your roadblocks. What do you want? Nothing. Tom glanced toward me. Then why call? A pause. Because Richard Carter deserves better. Every person in the room became still. Tom answered carefully. Richard is dead. I know. I watched him die. Silence. Then Cross continued. So did Daniel. Major Collins looked stunned. What? Tom quickly activated the speaker. Cross didn't seem to care. I never wanted any of this. Tom interrupted. You expect us to believe that? No. I expect you to listen. Cross spoke for nearly 5 minutes. No one interrupted him. 23 years earlier, Charles Benton had discovered evidence connecting powerful businessmen and corrupt federal officials to a land fraud scheme stretching across 3 states. Richard Carter wasn't part of the corruption. He had unknowingly purchased land that had been used to hide illegal transactions. Charles had agreed to testify. Daniel Mercer had been assigned to protect him. Cross, then a young FBI agent, had been assigned to the same operation. What happened? Tom finally asked. Cross answered without hesitation. Our own task force was compromised. Someone inside the investigation had warned the criminals. The safe meeting at the Carter Ranch became an ambush. Shots were fired. Daniel protected Charles. Richard protected Evelyn and the boys. By sunrise, the operation had collapsed. But Charles disappeared, Tom said. Yes. He chose to disappear. What? He entered witness protection. Everyone looked at Major Collins. She slowly nodded. That would explain why no one could ever find him. Cross continued. Richard agreed to let the world believe Charles had vanished. Why? Because if Charles was found, everyone he loved would be killed. Evelyn whispered. He never abandoned us. No. Cross answered gently. He sacrificed everything. Oh, Tom frowned. Then why was Charles buried under Richard's name? A long silence followed. When Cross finally answered, his voice sounded older, tired. Because Charles came back. Nobody breathed. He returned 4 years ago. I wanted to tell the truth, that the people we'd been hiding from found him first. And Richard. Richard tried to save him. Cross paused. He couldn't. The room remained silent. So Richard died 4 years ago. Yes. And Charles. The same night. Tom closed his eyes. So someone buried Charles as Richard. Yes. And hid Richard beneath the hunting cabin. Yes. Who? Cross gave the answer none of us expected. I did. But no one spoke. Cross continued before anyone could. I made the choice. If Richard was reported missing, they would have hunted Evelyn. They would have hunted Ryan. They would have hunted Derek. So I buried Charles under Richard's name. And I hid Richard where no one would ever think to look. Tom's voice hardened. You obstructed justice. Yes. You committed multiple felonies. Yes. You let an innocent family suffer. A long pause. Yes. I live with that every day. Major Collins stepped forward. The corruption case. What about it? Is it over? Cross laughed sadly. It ended years ago. The people responsible are either dead or serving life sentences. Tom looked confused. Then why keep hiding? Cross answered quietly. Because promises matter. I promised Daniel. I promised Richard. I promised Charles. I would keep Evelyn alive. The satellite phone suddenly crackled. Cross's breathing became shallow. Tom frowned. Are you injured? I've been sick for a long time. Where are you? It doesn't matter. It does! Noke! It really doesn't. Then he said something that made every sacrifice finally make sense. I've been living in the old fire lookout tower north of the ranch. Frank stared in disbelief. That's impossible. I watched over the ranch. For 23 years. When strangers came, I watched. When storms hit, I called anonymously. When fences were cut, I repaired them at night. Evelyn covered her mouth. The flowers, she whispered, every spring. Someone left fresh flowers on Richard's parents' graves. Cross smiled softly. Richard never forgot them. So neither did I. Deputies reached the fire tower less than 30 minutes later. The door stood open. Inside, everything was neat. A small bed, medical supplies, old newspaper clippings, hundreds of photographs. Most showed only one thing: the Carter family, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, the wedding between Evelyn and me. Cross had watched over them all, but he was gone. On the small wooden table, Sheriff Lawson found one final envelope, addressed to Michael Hayes, inside one handwritten page. Michael, if you're reading this, then I've finally kept every promise I ever made. The rest belongs to you. Don't spend the years you have left chasing ghosts. Richard loved Evelyn. Charles loved this family. Daniel gave his life believing ordinary people were worth extraordinary sacrifices. Honor them the only way that matters. Go home. Live the life they protected. Nathan. 3 months later, the ranch looked alive again. Children from the local school visited every weekend to learn about ranching. Ryan had accepted responsibility for his lies. The charges related to the inheritance fraud were resolved through the courts, taking into account his cooperation and the extraordinary circumstances uncovered during the investigation. He and Derek worked side by side repairing fences that had stood broken for years. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. Judge Helen Brooks officially closed the probate case. The ranch belonged exactly where Evelyn had always intended. No more courtrooms, no more lawyers, no more secrets. Frank Wilson resumed complaining about my fishing technique. Some things never change. One evening, Evelyn and I sat beneath the same old oak tree where we'd exchanged our wedding vows. The sunset painted the pastures gold. She slipped her hand into mine. You know, she smiled. We never really had a honeymoon. No. Had a criminal investigation instead. She laughed. The worst honeymoon in Texas. I don't know. I looked at the house. Ryan was helping Derek repair the front porch. Grandchildren chased one another across the yard. Frank was burning hamburgers on the grill. Judge Brooks was pretending not to notice. It turned out better than I expected. And Evelyn leaned her head against my shoulder. It turned out to be a family. After everything. The money never mattered. The ranch never mattered. Winning never mattered. The only thing that mattered was finally telling the truth. Because truth has a way of surviving, even when people don't. And sometimes, if you're fortunate enough, love survives too. Thank you for spending this journey with us. If Michael and Evelyn's story touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes it's never too late for love, forgiveness, and second chances. We'd love to have you back for our next story.